Thom Hartmann University Book Club today. We're reading from It's Even Worse Than You Think, What the Trump Administration is Doing to America by David K. Johnston. This is from page 61, the chapter titled Forgetting the Forgotten Man. In 2010, the U.S. Department of Labor created a website to honor workers who died on the job. Quote, more than 4,500 workers, lose their lives on the job every year. Below are the names of just a few who have died in recent months. OSHA's mission is to prevent workplace injuries, illnesses, and death, end quote. That Occupational Safety and Health Administration webpage was intended to highlight and humanize workplace deaths, to ensure awareness of tragedies, especially those that could have been avoided, according to Jordan Barab, an Assistant Secretary of Labor during the Obama administration. Barab explained, without information like this, fatality statistics are just raw, sterile numbers. The purpose of adding names and circumstances was to impress people with the tragedy that workers and their families face day after day. In August 2017, Trump's Labor Department quietly removed the preamble and the names when it killed the web page. It also took down, without public announcement, the fatality inspection data for all years prior to 2017. Those were just two of many other Trump administration actions inimical to worker safety. Others included no longer posting press releases about deaths resulting from unsafe working conditions, delaying rules to reduce sickness and death from inhaling silica and beryllium at work, delaying rules to lower the risk of railroad engineers and truck drivers falling asleep at the switch or wheel because of untreated sleep apnea, and the appointment to the Supreme Court of a judge who held that a company had the right to fire a worker who chose not to freeze to death on the job. A reasonable person listening to Donald Trump's inaugural address would never have expected these and other actions, assuming he believed what Trump said. Trump declared, "The forgotten men and women of our country will be forgotten no more. You came by the tens of millions to become part of a historic movement, the likes of which the world has never seen before. At the center of this movement is a crucial conviction that a nation exists to serve its citizens," end quote. Those men and women were forgotten again the following week. And it's not just workers whose interests were forgotten, not to mention who were put in danger. By deciding not to implement a rule to reduce the chances of truck drivers and train operators falling asleep at the wheel, Trump put at risk the lives of families driving along the highway, people riding on passenger trains, and many others. The White House called it President Trump's war on regulation. In his weekly radio address in early May, he declared that we've removed one job-killing regulation after another, and they're not pretty, and they're going. And believe me, we're just getting started on regulations. They're gone. Removal of data on workplace deaths, which averaged 13 per day, infuriated Jordan Barab, who is Obama's number 2 at OSHA. As a private citizen, Barab created a web page to keep track of the names of the dead and the reasons they were killed on the job. He called it, "OSHA won't tell you who died in the workplace, we will." After the election, Barab's concerns that the Trump administration would be bad for workers increased when he asked where the Trump beachhead team was and learned that none was coming. Each incoming administrator sends people to scope out federal agencies, learn who does what, and get a feel for the place in advance. Then the incoming administration sends its landing team, the people who will initially implement its policies for each agenda or at each agency. When no beachhead team came up, Barab figured it meant worker safety simply was not a priority for Trump. He hoped that was the worst of it, nothing more than apathy about worker safety. But when the landing team arrived, Barab realized trouble was coming for American workers, and it was not official apathy, but the start of assaults on workers' rights and safety. Barab said most of them had no idea they were going to labor and no interest in workers' issues either. What they did have was a mandate to delay, repeal, or weaken regulations that protected workers as part of Trump's plan to eliminate, quote, any regulation that is outdated, unnecessary, bad for workers, or contrary to the national interest, end quote. The first sign came when Trump nominated Judge Neil Gorsuch to the Supreme Court. Gorsuch was an acolyte of Antonin Scalia, whose seat he would be taking. Like Scalia, he said statutes should be literally read, and if that made no sense, well, that was a problem for Congress. Also like Scalia, he had a habit of consulting dictionaries, often following Scalia's practice of relying on the third, fourth, or even lesser definition of a word when it supported his jurisprudence. Trump's nomination alarmed unions. Jody Calamine, a communications worker of America lawyer, told Gorsuch's Senate confirmation hearing that Gorsuch, quote, is a threat to working people's health and safety, end quote. Calamine cited Gorsuch's dissent in the 2016 case to make this his point. That dissent, he said, reveals an anti-worker bias and features a judicial activism that will ultimately put workers' lives at risk, end quote. Those are unusually strong words about a Supreme Court nominee, but a review of the case shows Gorsuch has little regard for human life, at least when it comes to employers' power over their workers. He considers a rigid interpretation of the law more important. The case was about a law Congress passed giving workers the right to refuse dangerous tasks. Gorsuch said, no, you may not refuse. It's Even Worse Than You Think by David K. Johnston. You know, every day here on the Thom Hartmann Program, Louise and I and our team, Sean, Nate, Shira, Dave, Chase, Sue, Nigel, Ron, we all work to put together the very, very best show we possibly can. And there's an enormous amount of work that goes into the show. And one of the things that comes out of that is a lot of content, a lot of specific information that we go through and we dig out and, we want to share with you. And Sue puts that into our newsletter every week. And I think you will, if you don't already receive our newsletter, it comes in email every day, about an hour after we're off the air, or maybe a couple hours after we're off the air. And Sue goes through and pulls literally every link to every story that we talked about and puts it into the newsletter. It's free. We don't sell the list or anything. You complete safety and security. There's no charge. There's no nothing. Just, plug in your email address over at thomhartmann.com and you get signed up for the newsletter. It's all fairly obvious. You'll see it on the website. So check it out, thomhartmann.com. Thank you.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And hello, happy Friday, TGIF, Shabbat Shalom, Juma Mubarak, whatever it may be for you, happy Friday. Thom Hartmann here with you. It's Anything Goes Friday on the Thom Hartmann Program. And what an amazing time. Rashida Tlaib, and we'll be taking your calls shortly in the next hour. Congressman Ro Khanna is coming in. And Sean, you can pot the music down, please. In the next hour, Congressman Ro Khanna is coming in and will be with us for the hour taking your calls. And in our third hour, Bernie's going to drop by for just a short, hey, hi, how are you? Again, we have put the welcome mat out to all of the Democratic candidates. And so, when they call, we always say yes. So far, the only one who's called has been Bernie. Anyway, Rashida Tlaib says she's not going to visit the West Bank under Israel's conditions. And Israel, by the way, is saying that Ilhan Omar, Congresswoman Ilhan Omar, is still not welcome to come to their country because of something she said. I heard a guy on NPR this morning defending this, saying, well, we have laws to prevent communists from coming into our country, people who advocate the overthrow of our country and stuff like that. And he was saying that the BDS movement was advocating the overthrow of Israel or the destruction of Israel. I don't see it that way. Again, I'm not an advocate of the BDS movement, but it seems to me that they're trying to change Israel's behavior, not eliminate it as a country. And Tom Friedman this morning in the New York Times is saying anybody who thinks that Trump helped Israel with this is a fool. I mean, this is just highlighting the BDS movement. And now it's on the news. It was on NPR this morning. It's on CNN right now. In fact, at this moment, I've got it going in the studio here. I'm assuming it's on MSNBC. It's all over the place. This is not, Trump does things that he thinks are going to help Trump. And they're just like insanely destructive, and this is what he's doing. So anyhow, our two Muslim members of Congress were told by Israel, or actually by Netanyahu. We should clarify. Benjamin Netanyahu, the right-wing indicted alleged criminal who is the Prime Minister of Israel, is like the twin of the alleged criminal who is the president of the United States, Donald Trump, and who wanted to have a Muslim ban, and now Netanyahu is saying, okay, we'll keep these two Muslims out of Israel, and so anyhow, they backed off on Tlaib because her grandmother is 90 years old and lives in the West Bank, and so they said, okay, well, we'll let her in for humanitarian purposes. All right. So Tlaib this morning, or maybe it was yesterday afternoon, said, she tweeted this, visiting my grandmother under these oppressive conditions stands against everything I believe in. Silencing me and treating me like a criminal is not what my grandmother wants for me. It would kill a piece of me. So there you go. The federal appeals court yesterday ruled that the Trump administration, when they put children in cages, must feed them, honest to God, and must provide them with water and toothbrushes and toothpaste and sleeping mats. The Trump administration actually went to court to argue that appropriate levels of food and water and toothbrushes and sleeping mats were not necessary. This is nuts. In Georgia, a federal appeals court, or a U.S. District Court judge, Amy Totenberg, issued a preliminary injunction preventing Georgia election officials from using the state's current no-paper voting machines. There's no paper, there's no receipt, there's no nothing. They're totally electronic. You have no idea when you vote in Georgia whether your vote was actually recorded, whether it was recorded correctly. Nothing. And they're trying to replace these machines now with a new machine from a company that has Republican ties that, instead of producing a printed ballot, produces a barcode. So you still don't know, right? It's still a black box. And, why is it that, Brian Kemp, the guy who threw hundreds of thousands of people off the voting rolls just before he ran against Stacey Abrams and then won the vote by fewer people than he threw off the voting rolls, the illegitimate governor of Georgia, why is it that he doesn't want to have secure voting in Georgia? I think the question answers itself. Real wages fell in July. Real hourly wages declined for all workers. Consumer costs rose in July. Healthcare, for example, went up 0.5% after going up 0.3% the previous month. The healthcare industry, one of the most profitable in the world, $1 trillion industry, screwing us all constantly. Manufacturing output declined in July for the fifth time in the first 7 months of the year. The deficit for 2019, this is August, has already reached the point that it was last year at the end of the year. Trump is running up a deficit like nobody's business. Of course, this will help when a Democrat becomes president and all the Republicans and all the media start screaming that it is, it's now is the time. We've got to cut Social Security and Medicare because we can't afford it anymore. So, get ready. Foreign companies are investing less. Thousands more workers were laid off. Lowe's, for example, laid off a bunch of people after spending billions of dollars buying back their own stock. They didn't even bother to pay severance. They didn't even bother to notify people. Just basically said, okay, you got 2 weeks, you're gone. People who had worked there for decades, full time. Anyhow, Anything Goes Friday. We'll be back. What's going on?
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Why not just pot down? And welcome back. Wow, what a day, huh? Morris in Long Beach. Hey, Morris. Cesar Chavez? Thanks for listening to KPFK, by the way.
Oh, you're welcome, sir. Thank you. Do you remember when Cesar Chavez led a boycott of grapes in California?
I remember it well.
Okay, all right.
It was back in the 60s,
when we criminalize people with respect to the BDS for boycotting goods or services, that's what's criminal. And we should also remember this now.
Well, hang on just a second, Morris. We don't criminalize them. There's, I think that Actually, Congress has tried to pass a resolution, a law about that, haven't they? I need to dig into that. But anyhow, back to you, Morris. I'm sorry. It's Israel that criminalized it.
They have tried demonizing those who don't support the BDS.
Right.
But we should remember one thing. Okay, Palestine, Professor, is being occupied. That's a narrative that's never brought out there. They've got this thing framed all wrong. Palestine is being occupied, and if people listen to Middle East in Focus, which comes on KPFK on Sundays, they'd have a better understanding of what's going on over there. Yeah. And if they read anything by Max Blumenthal or Noam Chomsky, they'd have a better understanding of what's going on over there. And
Max wrote an extraordinary book about all this, yeah.
What gets my goat is, we know how we operate over here, freedom of speech, freedom of dissent, stuff like that. But these folks are coming over here with these fascist ideas. Well, if you're on a college campus and you say something in support of the Palestinians, you get put out. I mean, that's not America. You get put out your dorms. That's just not us. And we got to be careful of the influence that they have on us. And remember this, America. El Nakba was to the Palestinian what the Holocaust was to my Jewish brothers and sisters, in my opinion, God's people.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Morris. Jim in Lockport, Illinois. Hey, Jim, what's on your mind today?
Tom, it's been a long time since I talked to you, but I feel this is really important. And this has to do with the last debate. And being that Bernie Sanders is going to be on, I wish you could relay this to him.
Sure.
Because it was something that Bernie had missed. As a matter of fact, Liz Warren. And this had to do with the attacks on employer-based health care. And one of the things when Ryan and Bennett and Bullock went after him on the employer-based health care, and they said, well, they're going to lose that. Bernie should have came right out and said, absolutely, they're going to lose it. But they're not losing their health care. What they're losing is their actual contributions into the health care. Now, I had talked to a guy that delivers water here. All right? Now, I asked him, I said, now, I'm on disability, so I really don't know what. But anyway, I asked him, the big question was, how much do you pay to your health care every week?
Mm-hmm.
And he said $300 every 2 weeks. That's $7,400 a year.
Right.
And when you get down to the bare soups and nuts, that's a sizable raise on somebody's income.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right?
And if we went to Medicare for all, he would probably be paying in taxes less than half of that.
Oh, you betcha, Tom. Easily. Not to mention that you're able to go to any doctor possible because they're being paid by the government.
Right.
But to me, these issues, this was an issue that was totally missed. And we need Bernie to rebut that and go after them hard and really hard on that because they're actually going to gain money. And it's also good for the employer and small business.
Yeah, I'm with you.
Because small businesses won't have to struggle trying to pay health care.
No, you're right. And it's also going to do away with things like workman's compensation and other, there's a bunch of other insurances it'll eliminate the need for. Thanks, Jim. And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And it's Anything Goes Friday. And taking your calls. And Karen in Portland, Oregon. Hey, Karen, what's up?
Hi, Tom. I just wanted to get your feedback on an issue that's going to be going on here in Portland tomorrow. Apparently, neo-Nazi types are going to be demonstrating. And Councilperson Joanne Hardesty and Reverend Mondonay, who's now the head of the NAACP, issued a call for people to come down and peacefully have a vigil. Mm-hmm. And I'm strongly considering going, and I just wanted to put it out there to other people as well, and I wanted to get your feedback on it.
My opinion is that nobody should show up. We should deprive these people of any acknowledgement of their existence, that they should be completely ignored. Let them have the little rally, let them prance around and try to be tough guys and let it be a failure. The more people who show up in opposition to them, the more we validate them, the more we vindicate them, and the greater the probability that they will start something violent. This is an attempt by guys who are trying to climb the right-wing ecosphere, the right-wing world. They're trying to raise their profile in the right-wing world. And in my opinion, anybody who shows up to protest them says, "Oh yeah, you guys are important." I just say, screw them. It's like, go have a picnic, have a nice time, have a great day Saturday, someplace other than where these guys are.
What Councilwoman Hardesty was saying was, if we don't stand up against racism, it doesn't just go away. So that's a counter argument, and I'm weighing these things in my own mind, Tom, and I hear what you're saying. I'm really not sure what the best thing to do is.
There are 1,000 ways to stand up against racism without showing up when the Nazis decide that they're going to have a parade.
Okay, thank you so much.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you, Karen. It's just like, I'm not going to Nazi parades. Sorry, I have no interest. Nazis, screw them. Deb in Saginaw, Michigan. Hey, Deb, what's up?
Hey, Tom. Thanks for taking my call.
Sure.
I have a few things to say about Ken Cuccinelli before I conclude with my point.
Okay.
All right. First, a couple of quick resume highlights as to why he's even acting director of immigration. Mm-hmm. While he was Attorney General of Virginia, the Cooch, that's how I'm going to refer to him from this point on, was for restricting birthright citizenship. Now hold that thought. He also was for denying unemployment benefits to workers that didn't speak English, and he also authorized law enforcement to check the immigration status of anyone stopped by police. So now the Cooch is proposing to deny citizenship to legal immigrants if they've ever participated in any governmental assistance program. He wants to implement a wealth test for immigrants based on current income and future earning potential. And he flat out wants to deny citizenship to anyone not born in the United States, which brings me back to restricting birthright citizenship. Legalized and naturalized U.S. citizens are the Cooch's next target and could be at risk if any of us are considered a governmental liability, homeless, poor, sick, disabled, even elderly. Not only could these people lose their benefits, they could lose their rights and ultimately even their citizenship. I realize this may sound a bit Orwellian. However, the Cooch isn't only against legal immigrants, he's against any U.S. citizen that he believes doesn't measure up to his ideas and standards of what being a U.S. citizen is. That should be a warning.
Which is white, by the way. Let's just be real clear about a couple of things here, Deb. The other day when Steve King, the white supremacist congressman from Ohio, said that without rape and incest you wouldn't have the human population that we have, and you wouldn't have civilization, et cetera. He was speaking in opposition, or he was speaking in favor of legislation that would make abortion illegal, even in cases of rape and incest. In other words, no exceptions. Right. Now, the reason why he was saying this is because these white supremacists and white nationalists, people who think that white people, A, are superior and B, should be in charge, and people who think that this nation should be exclusively a nation of, by, and for white people. These people like Steve King and Ken Cuccinelli are hysterical about the fact that the birth rate right now, it's been going on for 2 or 3 years, more brown children are being born, or children of color are being born in the United States than white children. And these guys are hysterical about it. And this is the real reason why the hardcore right-wingers are gung-ho on the anti-abortion laws, number one. And number two, this is the subtext of everything that you just described Cuccinelli is saying. And we need to add that whenever we talk about these kinds of stories, whether it's about birthright citizenship, whether it's about immigration, whatever the dimension of the whole immigration or abortion debate may be, if it's being promoted by a Ken Cuccinelli or a Steve King or a Donald Trump, what they're really saying, and by the way, all the white supremacists, white nationalists understand this. So this is like, Ronald Reagan talking about states' rights back in the 80s. The people, the racists get it. Everybody else thinks, oh, he's having an intellectual conversation about the 10th Amendment. No, This is about, trying to turn America into, or trying to keep America with a white majority and a white power structure. Period. Full stop. That's what it's about. Whether it was Ken Cuccinelli promoting his ultrasound wands, the women had to be raped with an ultrasound wand 3 days before the abortion, and when back in Virginia when he was AG and he was all in favor of that. Whether it's, all this stuff, it all comes down to more white babies. That's what they want, and fewer brown people or people of any color coming into the United States from anywhere.
Right.
So anyhow, thank you, Deb. Thanks for pointing that out, and excellent point. Charles in Jacksonville, Florida. Hey, Charles, what's on your mind?
Good afternoon, Tom. I just want to make one quick comment, and I would like your response. In dealing with the congresswoman that's being denied access to the country of Israel, is the Democrat response is, since they can't go, none of them will go?
I think from what I'm seeing, reading, hearing is that most of them have already gone. That this wasn't one, and this is something that I missed yesterday. This is not one giant group of people who are going to show up and say, "Ta-da! Here we are, all 41 of us." They're all going on different schedules at different times and meeting with different people when they get there. It's not an organized trip. It's just, it's an opportunity that was created. So Steny Hoyer, for example, yesterday, one of our listeners called Steny Hoyer's office and said, don't go to Israel. And they said, he's already there. He's been there for a few days. So
and I think they should all leave.
Yeah. So
country, too much money.
Yeah.
Disrespected like that.
Well, Bernie came out and said this, and I thought that was pretty impressive. He basically said, if Netanyahu wants to keep American members of Congress out of his country, maybe he should stop taking $3 billion a year from the United States in foreign aid. And and Bernie is, not only a senator, but he's also Jewish, and he's been to Israel many times. And so I think that's a pretty strong statement, and I think that's where it's going. Charles, thanks a lot for calls. Let's see here. Rob. Hey, Rob, in Yorkville, Illinois. You wanted to disagree with me? You think that people should show up when right-wingers decide that they're going to declare Actually, Rob, hang on just a minute. Let me put you on hold. I just realized I've only got 30 seconds here. And whoa, damn, I just hung up on Rob. I tried to put him on hold and I hung up on him. Rob, call right back. Because I think it'll be an interesting conversation. Anyhow, as I mentioned earlier, the Rashida Tlaib has said no. We're not going to go. And a fascinating piece that I just want to call your attention to in the Huffington Post about WhatsApp. It's a product that Facebook has rolled out, and it is being used. It was used in Brazil to get Jair Bolsonaro, the hardcore right-wing Donald Trump of Brazil, elected by spreading lies that his left-wing opponent was in favor of gay pedophilia. Honest to God. And so Facebook screws another country. They screwed America. We got Trump. They're not Facebook themselves, but apparently they're providing a platform for people. Now they're doing it to Brazil.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
It's Anything Goes Friday, and just a heads up, in the second hour of the program, we're going to have Congressman Ro Khanna taking your calls for the hour. We'll be back with your calls. Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is The Hidden History of Guns and the Second Amendment by yours truly. This is from Chapter 1, The Unholy Alliance of Racism, Genocide, and Guns. In Isaiah 14:21, the Lord tells Isaiah, "Prepare for his sons a place of slaughter because of the iniquity of their fathers." It's a variation on the old story of karma and seems in a very real way to be playing out today in the United States. America is facing an epidemic. Public health officials use that word of gun-related suicides, accidents, and even homicides and police killings. That epidemic has grown worse in the past decade, largely because the number of guns in America has increased, in large part because of the racial fears of white men who have bought guns in record numbers for 8 years during the time in office of America's first black president. A landmark 1999 study from researchers Franklin Zimmering and Gordon Hawkins showed that the main correlation, far surpassing mental illness, socioeconomic status, or race, that could be defined as causal in predicting the rates of gun deaths is a simple number: the number of guns distributed among society. In the 30 years since that study, Zimmering and Hawkins' results have been replicated and reanalyzed dozens of times. As the American Academy of Pediatrics said in a release published in AAAS's Science magazine, quote, new research shows dramatic differences in the number of children hospitalized and killed each year in the U.S. from firearm-related injuries based on their state's gun legislation, even after adjusting for poverty, unemployment, and education rates. It found twice as many pediatric firearm deaths in states with the most lenient gun regulations compared to states where gun laws are strictest, end quote. They added that this is a critical issue for children, quoting Stephanie Cho, MD, the lead author of the abstract, quote, firearm-related injuries are the second leading cause of death among children in the United States. But we found a clear discrepancy in where those deaths happen that corresponds with the strengths of states' firearm legislation. In states with lenient laws, children die at alarmingly greater rates, end quote. And unsurprisingly, America not only has unusually lenient gun laws, but also has more guns in civilian hands than any other country in the world. America has a bit more than 4% of the world's population, but holds almost 50% of all the guns in civilian hands worldwide, more than 390 million guns. And the more guns a society has, the more gun deaths it will experience. The NRA and their army of lobbyists have been quite successful in making this happen. During Obama's presidency, there was a steady and hysterical drumbeat of articles, emails, and political proclamations by so-called pro-gun politicians and think tanks, suggesting that Obama was preparing to take away everyone's guns at any minute. There was even a subtext embraced by the hard right that he wasn't going to stop there. After disarming white Americans, these folks said, Obama was going to intern them in otherwise unused FEMA camps. Flipped-out gun owners were repeatedly arrested during the Obama years trying to break into retired or temporarily vacant military facilities and toxic waste sites, looking for evidence to prove that Obama was, in fact, preparing the modern-day version of the World War II-era Japanese internment camps. White supremacy was the founding notion of this nation. White Europeans thought themselves so superior to the human beings they met here in 1492 that Columbus himself became the first North American slaver, shipping Taino Indians back to Spain as slaves to the royal family. A slave is as good as gold, Columbus wrote for the king and queen. Europeans in the Americas then stepped up that game into a hemisphere-wide campaign of racial genocide, pulling off the largest multi-generational mass murder in the history of the world. In the midst of that effort, they also created the legal mechanisms necessary to define and legally regulate slavery, and even built those systems into America's founding document, the Constitution. America was birthed in slavery and genocide, and both needed guns. It was the superior weaponry of guns that gave the European settlers a massive advantage over the bow and arrow-equipped Native Americans, and it was the raw power of widespread white ownership of guns in the South that propped up the institution of slavery for hundreds of years. Without guns, neither would have been possible, or at least neither would have been as easy as they were to pull off. And now, after centuries of guns being used to kill off and keep down people of color in America, those same guns are creating a terrifying epidemic of gun-facilitated violence, from public schools to private homes and public concerts. It's enough to make one think that Isaiah was onto something. Chapter 2, The Sanitized History of America. The United States' expansion and conquest in the late 18th century through the 19th century and into the 20th century is a history written by white men, inked in the blood of Native Americans, and built on the broken and bloody backs of enslaved people brought here from Africa. From 1791, when the Bill of Rights went into effect, until the end of the Civil War, the Second Amendment protected the rights only of white men to own guns. This is simply because until the ratification of the 14th Amendment, states determined who was recognized as a person protected under the Constitution. Initially, in most states, that meant that white men who owned land and paid taxes were the only people considered full citizens under the Constitution. In the South, white men with guns formed slave patrols to control slaves and formed posses to hunt escaped slaves. the book, The Hidden History of Guns and the Second Amendment.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
We've been talking about a whole wide variety of things here. Let's pick up Rob again. Rob in Yorkville, Illinois. Hey, Rob, thanks for listening to WCPT. What's up?
Hey, thanks, Tom. Tom, you mentioned about ignoring those people when they want to congregate because, if you give them oxygen, it just helps them have legitimacy. I remember being a younger guy back in Chicago in the 90s, and I would try to organize people to go and not confront them violently, but just to be there and be a presence when they would try to congregate in Illinois and southern Wisconsin. And people would say, just ignore them. They're going to go away. If you give them oxygen, they're going to grow, and you're going to give them legitimacy. And look at where we are now. I don't think we can. I think it's too late to ignore them. I think look at what happens when you ignore them. They grow slowly. They're growing in the churches. Tom, they've been teaching their children to use guns in their church basements, like 5, 6, 7 miles away from the city limits.
Yeah, and these are things that appropriately government should deal with, and we should all be supporting organizations that work in the courts, for example, suing these people. I mean, a number, the Klan has been taken down by lawsuits. Another one of the white supremacist groups was recently taken down by lawsuits. They lost a big property someplace someplace out here in the West. I mean, there are ways to do this. There are ways to respond to this. I don't think that we need to show up every time this is two groups who are run by people who really want to have a major national presence. They are trying to become Fox News stars. They're trying to be a big deal. And it's like, why feed that?
Because if you don't pay attention to it, it grows.
I'm not saying don't pay attention to it. I'm saying don't show up and let their show be a bigger show. Just ignore them. I mean, that's that. Of course, you do everything you can to fight white supremacy, and you do it in.
We did that.
No,
we ignored them.
It is not. These people are not here. These people are not here, Rob, because they've been ignored. These people are here because they have been incited. There is an entire infrastructure that promotes white supremacy and promotes Nazi ideology, basically. And that infrastructure needs to be challenged, and it is being challenged in some regards. And we all need to condemn it and that sort of thing. But when they say we're going to do a public spectacle so that we can get a lot of attention, this is the reason I think that they need to stop even talking about Trump and his Fox News carries every single one of his rallies, his live television. They're just trying to crank it up, so. Anyhow, Rob, I guess neither of us have convinced the other, so we'll agree to disagree. But thanks a lot for the call. Ann in Longmont, Colorado. Hey, Ann, what's on your mind today?
Oh, hi. Good morning, Tom. Can you hear me okay?
I can.
Okay. I just wanted to thank you for this show very much. I just want to draw your attention to a body of work that was started to be published on July 18th by Whitney Webb at the mintnews.com.
Mm-hmm.
And she's documenting how these blackmail rings that actually started in the 1930s by organized crime. And she's outlining all the tentacles that these organizations had to the CIA and the FBI and how they were used to coerce, during the 1950s and the 60s with Fidel
Blackmail
Castro.
rings. What are you talking about?
But yeah, it's these sexual blackmail rings. Anyway, the trail that she's
is this like Epstein having wealthy white guys or wealthy old guys or whatever, all of the above, come in and have sex with young girls and then videotape it or document it and then threaten them? Is that the sort of thing you're talking about?
Well, her point is that she's drawing off of the comment that Ouster Costa made about him being tied to intelligence. She's presenting that this is not a case where it ends with Jeffrey Epstein. It began in the 1930s. She's laying out that he inherited it, and that it will keep going unless...
Oh, I think this is an old scam that goes way back. I think Epstein, I'm not sure that he inherited anything. I think he just launched it. I mean, at the same time that Bill Barr's dad was writing a novel about sexual slavery, he was the headmaster of Dalton School, where he had hired Jeffrey Epstein, and who was, I think, starting his sexual slavery business. And and it just grew from there. But J. Edgar Hoover did this.
Yes, exactly. Her point is that Bill Barr, because of his connections to this, is going to try to make this, blame it on maybe the guards. And
of course, it's already done it.
Her other point, and her other point is the CIA and the FBI, that's our tax dollars paying for these sexual blackmail rings that they know about, that they're using to coerce whoever.
Yeah, well, to the extent that may be the case. I mean, I've seen some, the CIA has done some really skeezy stuff over the years, and so has the FBI, and even they would not deny that. Whether they're still doing it domestically, I don't know, and it wouldn't shock me to find out that they still are. But I've seen some stuff on the internet that I just know is not true, and so be careful. But yeah, and I think this is something that needs to be on all our radar screens, and we need to be paying attention to it. Thanks a lot for the call, Patrick in Seaside, California. Hey, Patrick, what's up?
Hey, Tom. I think if I'm quick and efficient, I could maybe get you to address 2 quick points. One is about evangelicals waiting for Jesus to come back, and the other is about fascism in America. But before I do, I have a suggestion for the end of the summer, and it could even, if it took off, it could even be an annual thing. Thom Hartmann's End of Summer Liberal Palooza, with you, Amy Goodman, Abby Martin, Michael Moore, Mike Malloy, Jimmy Dore, and Lee Camp, and we see how long it takes your face to turn red from laughter. And it'd be kind of like the choir hanging out at the choir master's house.
Yeah, we used to do that with Air America. Me and Stephanie Miller and Randy Rhodes and Ron Reagan. We used to travel around the country and do this whole song and dance, and it was a lot of fun. It was good.
Thom Hartmann's End of Summer.
So anyhow, Patrick,
okay, my 2 quick
pick
points.
a topic, and we will discuss it.
Well, I wanted to know, we were talking about evangelicals in America waiting for the rapture.
Yeah.
And my mom was an evangelical. I'm wondering if this goes back to John Rushdoony. And as far as fascism in America, if we go by the definition of fascism as the billionaire class and the corporations owning our country, do we go back to fascism to Reagan, Nixon, the Gilded Age, or have we been flirting with fascism since the Revolution?
Yeah.
Since the founding.
Thanks, Patrick. I think I already answered your first question. Nilofar in Santa Monica, California. Hey, Nilofar, what's up?
Hi, Tom. I just had a question, and that was basically with the fact that in this country we can literally sue anything and everything. Why is it that the victims of these gun shootings don't selectively and collectively sue the manufacturers?
Because Congress passed a law giving the manufacturers immunity.
Can we change the law?
We certainly can, but not with Republicans in control of Congress.
But how can we go about changing that?
We elect Democrats. It's just that simple.
That goes without saying, but in order to change a law, we have to do a lot of
No, I think there's plenty of will among the Democrats and within the Democratic Party to reverse that law that the Republicans passed. They gave immunity to gun manufacturers, some lawsuits for things that happened with their weapons, and particularly that they've promoted. So the bottom line, if you want, you're welcome. If you want this to happen, then do everything you can to elect Democrats, particularly Democrats who are supportive of some sort of rational gun control. But it's going to take Democrats. Michael in Denver. Hey, Michael, what's up?
Hi, Tom. Good morning. Reason I was calling, as I mentioned to your screener there, was that I'm doing everything that I can to get 3 to 4 points across for gun control. And that's national registration, mandatory insurance, periodic recertification, and training training as much as you can. And assault weapons need to go away. I said, I'm a lifetime member and all, and I do have guns. I'm not particularly looking to get rid of them at this point in time, but I do believe that everything needs to be done, and this thing about mental health again comes out.
This was Trump's mantra last night, by the way.
That was his mantra last night in New Hampshire.
And he was reading off the prompter, so you know that the NRA basically wrote this for him.
Oh, absolutely. Anything that comes out of his mouth about this is basically handed to him by Wayne LaPierre.
Yeah.
And all. And one other quick thing before I let you go, Tom. I've been meaning to call about Bill Baird. I just want to mention one thing because you've had people on about this before, and you know about it. You've read about it and everything. Bill Baird is a member of Opus Dei.
Who's Bill Baird? Are you talking about Bill Barr, the Attorney General?
I'm sorry. Bill Barr, not Bill Baird.
Oh, so he's a member of Opus Dei? That doesn't surprise me. I mean, you've got several members of the Supreme Court who are members of Opus Dei.
Yes, and if you look at that organization is an ultra conservative organization started in Spain by fascists.
Yeah, absolutely. And Michael, thank you for the call. We'll be back. It's 45 minutes past the hour.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Back with more of your calls. It's Anything Goes Friday. Stick around. And welcome back. It is Anything Goes Friday. And let's see here, Sherry in Denver. Hey, Sherry, what's on your mind?
Last night, a group of us went to a gathering for Andrew Romanoff. He's trying to run against Cory Gardner, the Republican senator in Colorado. He ran before, and he ran against Michael Bennet. He was the first one in politics years ago that decided not to take any money from anyone except, people.
Oh, he's a Democrat, and he ran against Bennet in the primary. And now he's running in the primary. Well, if Hickenlooper gets into the primary, he's going to have a challenge here. He's going to have a problem because Hickenlooper is another corporate Democrat. He'll take all kinds of money from.
Okay. I know that. I know a lot about Hickenlooper, and I know what he did with the fracking and how he changed everything. And a lot of people in Colorado do not like him because of what he's done, and a lot of people don't know about it. But I wanted to talk about Romanoff for a moment. He is a progressive, very, very bright. He's been very active in a lot of things in Colorado while he hasn't been running. And he said something yesterday that I wanted to repeat, that I thought he told it to me, and I thought it was very interesting. I went over and asked him the name of his grandfather because they had come, from Europe. And he told me he was his name is Romanoff now. He said it was Kaplan and it was changed.
Oh, interesting.
At that time.
Was that to conceal that he had Jewish ancestors or something?
Yeah. Okay. I'm also Jewish. Okay. And I don't look at, and I wasn't sure about him, but I thought so. But this is the story.
Well, there was a lot of that happening in the from 1900 to around 1930.
Our whole family's name was changed.
Yeah.
So that's another story. But the thing is that he was in Estes Park with a group that had invited him up, and a woman raised her hand or got up, and she said to him, "Are you Jewish?" And he said, "Yes, I am." And she said, "Well, we don't need any more Jews in politics."
My God.
Got up. Well, yeah, if you want to talk about racism, got up, and people booed her out.
That's
Isn't
great.
That wonderful? I mean, I like the second part of the story more than the first.
Yeah.
And someone was behind me and said that their name had been changed, and look what's happening now. But I want I want people in Colorado, if they're listening, to please go on his website. Get to know him. Get to know the name. Forget about Hickenlooper. This is a man that should win.
Now, how many people are in the how many people are in the Democratic primary for this for Cory Gardner's seat?
He said, but he's been
I thought there was like
running.
4 or 5.
I don't know. He's been running, and the other story is that he had talked to Hickenlooper before he started running for president, and he said no, he wasn't going to run in senator. He was a leader, and he wanted to make the rules.
Right. Well, you know,
Right.
he had his chance. He tried. It didn't quite work out. So we'll see.
He said people had begged him, and I said, "Is that why his percentage is only 1% of people supporting?" I'm sorry.
Yeah, there's a bunch of politicians here,
listening
you know, and who you know, they look in the mirror and they see the president, but the rest of us don't. So, Sherry, thanks a lot for the call.
God.
Yeah, thanks a lot for the call. We'll be back. It's 49 minutes past the hour here on the Thom Hartmann Program, the place where we dare to ask, is Walmart a person? And we dare to say no. Welcome back. Lauren in Twinsburg, Ohio. Hey, Lauren. Anything Goes Friday. What's up?
Hi, Tom. How are you? Listen, just wanted to bring up some discussion on this racism issue in our country. And I really got a statement from Martin Luther King that sums it all up. In America, we had all better learn how to live together as brothers, or we will all perish as fools. And I think that sums the whole thing up. And when I think about what's going on with Israel denying U.S. Congress people access to their country, irregardless of what their religious beliefs may be, they are still elected representatives of this country.
Yeah.
And as far as I'm concerned, when you have Bernie and the other congressperson on, they need to stand united on this and say, you know, if one congressperson of America isn't welcome in Israel any longer, then none of them should be welcome in Israel, and they should withhold any and all aid to Israel until such a time as Benjamin Netanyahu comes over here and apologizes to our entire Congress and the American people for all we have done for Israel through all the years. And it's just unbelievable to me that the American people are allowing themselves to be manipulated by these absolute, what I call morons.
Yeah.
I mean, when I see President Trump and I see Netanyahu, the only thing that those two have in common anymore is that their ignorance is surpassed only by their bad manners.
Yeah.
This has gotten way out of hand.
I get it. And Lauren, I don't. With regard to the specific details, you know, I would fine tune it a little bit. The sentiment, your sentiment, I completely agree with. Lauren, thank you for the call. Stan in Champaign, Illinois. It says you disagree with me about Medicare. What's that?
Well, yeah, for 90% of the time, Tom, I agree with you 100%. But sometimes we all get things wrong. What?
Sure. What did I get wrong? I'm listening.
Okay. You say that Medicare costs 2 or 3% to operate,
to administer,
and to administer, and that's not even close to true. What it costs is 2 or 3% at the federal level to sign people up for Medicare, and then when they have a claim, the claim payment is handled by an insurance company. Yeah, I'm in Illinois, so my Medicare payments are handled by Blue Cross and Blue Shield, and Blue Cross and Blue Shield.
That's only if you
10%.
have privatized Medicare. That's only if you have Medicare Advantage. If you have a Medicare Advantage program, you're not on Medicare.
No, that's not true. If you have Medicare, Advantage, then that's probably not true, because Medicare Advantage gets a 20% higher payment from the government than regular Medicare does. But every Medicare payment that's made is made by an insurance company.
That is a subsidy to Medicare Advantage, to the for-profit insurance companies that are offering Medicare Advantage, we subsidize them to the tune of 20% so that their profits are covered as well as their costs. But are you telling me that in Illinois that the Medicare, whatever it's called, the Department of Medicare Services or whatever it's called, is
Medicare payments?
Right, has subcontracted with Blue Cross Blue Shield to handle payments?
Correct, and they do that throughout the country, and those subcontracted insurance companies get 10%. That's why the Affordable Care Act had a 15% as its base level for group insurance companies, was to kind of match that 10% that they pay for Medicare so that it was equalized, if you will.
Interesting. You may be right, Stan. I'm taking you at your word. I have not ever heard of this, and
I was an insurance agent for 25 years.
Yeah, I'm not disbelieving you. If that's the case, I think that's a shame. I mean, we're seeing the same thing in the military, where more than half of our military budget now is going to private for-profit corporations rather than the Army, Navy, Air Force, and Marines, and Coast Guard. And this is what the Republicans have been doing for years and years and years, is changing the law and tweaking. Go ahead.
If you would just check out what I said, and correct your verbiage, I would really appreciate it, because
sure.
Go ahead.
No, I got it. And if Blue Cross Blue Shield is handling claims, of course they're throwing their profit in there, and that's going to increase the cost of Medicare. And if we go to a Medicare for all kind of system, that's what we need to get rid of, frankly. Stan, thanks a lot for the call. I promise I will look into what you're saying here. Bill in El Dorado Hills, California. Hey, Bill, what's up?
Well, what I was trying to do is, when I talked to your screener, I was saying that I want to go over back to Europe. I lived in Paris, and I could get back there. I know how to do the visa for myself and my wife, so we could get back there. Partly because I'm afraid that Donald Trump, if he loses, he won't leave. He'll do everything he can to stay.
I think what he'll do is he'll become one of two things is going to happen. Either the Republican Party will once he loses, either the Republican Party will say, okay, this guy is toast. He's a has-been. He's gone. And they'll just all start ignoring him, and even Fox News won't take his calls anymore, and he'll just drift off into obscurity and probably go to jail in New York State. Or the Republican Party won't disown him, and Fox News will embrace him, and he'll end up with a show on Fox News, and he'll be the television equivalent of Rush Limbaugh, and he will be a force to reckon with. And I guarantee you that's the outcome that he's going to want. And so we'll see what happens. But he's going to leave the White House if he loses.
I kind of agree with Bill Maher, and I don't think so.
Well, and Bill got that from Michael Cohen. I understand it's from a good source, right? I mean, we all got it from Michael Cohen. Who said that was his biggest concern, and it's a legitimate concern. But I think that our system, one of the things that we're learning is how fragile our system is. When you've got a president who is explicitly, intentionally an arsonist, essentially, against democracy. But on the other hand, we're also seeing some real remarkable and positive signs of resilience. The one thing that could turn that back are all these right-wing judges that Moscow Mitch is getting on the Supreme Court. So, or Massacre Mitch, let's call him. Bill, thanks for the call. We'll be back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
We say fight back!
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is The Hidden History of Guns and the Second Amendment by yours truly. This is from Chapter 1, The Unholy Alliance of Racism, Genocide, and Guns. In Isaiah 14:21, the Lord tells Isaiah, "Prepare for his sons a place of slaughter because of the iniquity of their fathers." It's a variation on the old story of karma and seems in a very real way to be playing out today in the United States. America is facing an epidemic. Public health officials use that word of gun-related suicides, accidents, and even homicides and police killings. That epidemic has grown worse in the past decade, largely because the number of guns in America has increased, in large part because of the racial fears of white men who have bought guns in record numbers for 8 years during the time in office of America's first black president. A landmark 1999 study from researchers Franklin Zimmering and Gordon Hawkins showed that the main correlation, far surpassing mental illness, socioeconomic status, or race, that could be defined as causal in predicting the rates of gun deaths is a simple number: the number of guns distributed among society. In the 30 years since that study, Zimmering and Hawkins' results have been replicated and reanalyzed dozens of times. As the American Academy of Pediatrics said in a release published in AAAS's Science magazine, quote, "New research shows dramatic differences in the number of children hospitalized and killed each year in the U.S. from firearm-related injuries based on their state's gun legislation, even after adjusting for poverty, unemployment, and education rates. It found twice as many pediatric firearm deaths in states with the most lenient gun regulations compared to states where gun laws are strictest," end quote. They added that this is a critical issue for children, quoting Stephanie Cho, MD, the lead author of the abstract, quote, "Firearm-related injuries are the second leading cause of death among children in the United States. But we found a clear discrepancy in where those deaths happen that corresponds with the strengths of states' firearm legislation. In states with lenient laws, children die at alarmingly greater rates," end quote. And unsurprisingly, America not only has unusually lenient gun laws, but also has more guns in civilian hands than any other country in the world. America has a bit more than 4% of the world's population, but holds almost 50% of all the guns in civilian hands worldwide, more than 390 million guns. And the more guns a society has, the more gun deaths it will experience. The NRA and their army of lobbyists have been quite successful in making this happen. During Obama's presidency, there was a steady and hysterical drumbeat of articles, emails, and political proclamations by so-called pro-gun politicians and think tanks, suggesting that Obama was preparing to take away everyone's guns at any minute. There was even a subtext embraced by the hard right that he wasn't going to stop there. After disarming white Americans, these folks said, Obama was going to intern them in otherwise unused FEMA camps. Flipped-out gun owners were repeatedly arrested during the Obama years trying to break into retired or temporarily vacant military facilities and toxic waste sites, looking for evidence to prove that Obama was, in fact, preparing the modern-day version of the World War II-era Japanese internment camps. White supremacy was the founding notion of this nation. White Europeans thought themselves so superior to the human beings they met here in 1492 that Columbus himself became the first North American slaver, shipping Taino Indians back to Spain as slaves to the royal family. "A slave is as good as gold," Columbus wrote for the king and queen. Europeans in the Americas then stepped up that game into a hemisphere-wide campaign of racial genocide, pulling off the largest multi-generational mass murder in the history of the world. In the midst of that effort, they also created the legal mechanisms necessary to define and legally regulate slavery, and even built those systems into America's founding document, the Constitution. America was birthed in slavery and genocide, and both needed guns. It was the superior weaponry of guns that gave the European settlers a massive advantage over the bow and arrow-equipped Native Americans, and it was the raw power of widespread white ownership of guns in the South that propped up the institution of slavery for hundreds of years. Without guns, neither would have been possible, or at least neither would have been as easy as they were to pull off. And now, after centuries of guns being used to kill off and keep down people of color in America, those same guns are creating a terrifying epidemic of gun-facilitated violence, from public schools to private homes and public concerts. It's enough to make one think that Isaiah was onto something. Chapter 2, The Sanitized History of America, The United States' expansion and conquest in the late 18th century through the 19th century and into the 20th century is a history written by white men, inked in the blood of Native Americans, and built on the broken and bloody backs of enslaved people brought here from Africa. From 1791, when the Bill of Rights went into effect, until the end of the Civil War, the Second Amendment protected the rights only of white men to own guns. This is simply because until the ratification of the 14th Amendment, states determined who was recognized as a person protected under the Constitution. Initially, in most states, that meant that white men who owned land and paid taxes were the only people considered full citizens under the Constitution. In the South, white men with guns formed slave patrols to control slaves and formed posses to hunt escaped slaves. The book, The Hidden History of Guns and the Second Amendment.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
You know, every day here on the Thom Hartmann Program, Louise and I and our team, Sean, Nate, Shira, Dave, Chase, Sue, Nigel, Ron, we all work to put together the very, very best show we possibly can. And there's an enormous amount of work that goes into the show. And one of the things that comes out of that is a lot of content, a lot of specific information that we go through and we dig out and, we want to share with you. And Sue puts that into our newsletter every week. And I think you will, if you don't already receive our newsletter, it comes in email every day, about an hour after we're off the air, or maybe a couple hours after we're off the air. And Sue goes through and pulls literally every link to every story that we talked about and puts it into the newsletter. It's free. We don't sell a list or anything. You complete safety and security. There's no charge. There's no nothing. Just, plug in your email address over at thomhartmann.com and you get signed up for the newsletter. It's all fairly obvious. You'll see it on the website. So check it out, thomhartmann.com. Thank you.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And anything goes Friday, but this next hour is going to be Congressman Ro Khanna taking your calls for the hour. Congressman Khanna, welcome back to the program.
Tom, thanks for having me on again.
And I should add Khanna, KHANNA.house.gov is your website, and you can be tweeted at Rep. Ro Khanna, ROKHANNA, and you represent the 17th District of California, Silicon Valley, essentially. Is there anything, first of all, just to start out, anything that you wanted to riff about at all, what's going on in the world, what's going on in Congress, or do you want to just jump right in and pick up calls? We've already got some calls stacked up for you.
Well, I would just say two quick things. I mean, first of all, it's absolutely outrageous that Israel has denied entry to Representative Tlaib and Representative Omar. I've been saying it's not just an insult to them, it's an insult to the American people. How can you deny access to a member of Congress in light of the fact that we give billions of dollars of aid to these countries, and that the members of Congress have a legitimate reason to be there to conduct oversight over what's happening with the aid. The second thing, which I know, Tom, we've spoken about briefly offline, is the raids that took place on these in these places against immigrants. No one is talking about why they are going after vulnerable immigrant populations and not after the employers for hiring them. And we ought to be talking about the consequences for the employers who are breaking willfully immigration law.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely, and yes, there was something I was going to add, but it's escaped my brain. But I'm with you on that. So let's just jump into our phone calls, okay?
Sounds great.
Okay, Joe in Cupertino, California, presumably one of your constituents. Joe, you're on the air.
Good morning, gentlemen. Tom, thank you again for allowing me to speak to the Congressman. Just real quick, yesterday you had a call from a gentleman from South Asia. It was very difficult to understand. He was trying to articulate the situation in the Kashmir region. I was wondering if Congressman Khanna, who has very personal information about that, could explain it to me better, because I'm very confused. I think that there is potential for conflict in this part of the world, and I don't think that this country should really be involved because we don't really have any moral standing in the world anymore. But that's just my personal opinion. I'll take your answer off the air. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, India and Pakistan have been at two wars over Kashmir, and there's concern of escalating rhetoric in the subcontinent. And I think the role the United States should play is to continue to call for dialogue and ratcheting down the rhetoric and peace. But I'm not convinced that having Trump mediate is going to do anything. In fact, I think that may have precipitated the crisis when he said that the Indian Prime Minister had asked him to mediate, and then the Indian Prime Minister denied that. And I think that led to a cascade of events. So my sense is that what we should say is that the parties should sit down and try to resolve this and stop the ratcheting of rhetoric.
My understanding that this fellow who called in yesterday said, no, you've got it wrong, was that Kashmir, as a consequence of this history, Kashmir had been running as more or less a semi-autonomous region with its own internal systems of governance with kind of oversight from India, I suppose you could say. And that India has cut them off from the world. They've cut off their internet, they've cut off their phone service, they have diminished Kashmir's ability to govern themselves. Now, he said I'm wrong about that, and I may well be. I do not know very much about that region. What is actually happening there right now?
Well, I would want to get the facts too. I think that my understanding is that there's part of Kashmir that's in Indian territory, and then there's part of Kashmir that's in Pakistan territory. That the part that is in Indian territory, India has exerted control over, and originally it called for a plebiscite, but India had amended the constitution to allow for the governor to be able to say that they want to join the rest of the state. And so I think there's a constitutional debate within India about whether they have that power or not. Of course, the parliament voted overwhelmingly that they did, and now it's going to go to the Supreme Court. Everyone hopes and wants that they respect the human rights of people in Kashmir, even if they believe that the process is legitimate. But I don't think that it was semi-autonomous. I mean, that has never been my understanding, though I will say I'm not an expert on the region.
Yeah, well, I know less. You know, I mean, I've spent a lot of time in India, but I've never been to Kashmir, and so yeah. Thank you, Robbie in Portland, Oregon. You're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Hey, Tom, you're breaking my heart, man. Before I ask the question to you, Tom, I call every week, and you can't wait to hang up on me.
Okay, I'm going to hang up on you right now then. Jim in Los Angeles, you're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Hi, Tom. Hi, Congressman. Can Congress pass a bill to allow all congressmen immediate access to all private prisons? Go in with cameras, doctors, and DAs, charge ICE with kidnapping, negligent homicide, and torture. Taking children from their parents is torture for both parents and children.
Jim, I agree with you completely. I mean, I've called for the abolishment of private prisons. I don't understand why we want to have corporate-run prisons when prisons serve a public function, have a rehabilitative function, have to uphold human rights. It's wrong to outsource that to private prisons. So I believe that they need to be abolished, both in the criminal justice system, and we ought not to have private detention facilities in immigration. I mean, these should be government public functions with government accountability. Short of that, though, I absolutely would support legislation to allow inspection by members of Congress or other agencies to make sure that they're at least upholding some basic standards.
Janet in Mount Vernon, Washington. You're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Thank you for taking my call, Tom. Congressman Khanna, first of all, you are one of my heroes. I say Ro Khanna for Speaker. But my question for you is, right now, I think that all of these diversions, denying Ilhan Omar and the other congresswoman access to Israel. It's like it's reality TV. It's what he does. Meanwhile, we've got this despicable person named William Perry Penley, who's going to become the head of the Bureau of Land Management. This is a man, it's like putting an arsonist in charge of the fire station. He hates public lands. And, you know, what is Congress doing to keep, and they're going around, they're going to put him in as the assistant because they know he is so despicable. He hates public lands. He's worse than James Watts back in the Reagan days. You know, what can we do? Our public lands the billionaires are literally picking this country apart. And I feel like that there should be a bumper sticker that says, it's the Koch brothers, stupid, because they want access to all of these natural resources, and our public lands and our public parks are one of our greatest treasures in this country. What can Congress do? What are you doing to keep an eye on this?
Jen, I appreciate very much the kind words, and I completely agree with you that the real stories, the uncovered stories, are what's taking place in the agencies, whether it is the person you referenced and public land management and the giving away of public lands, or whether it's the Interior Department's recent policy where they said that the Endangered Species Act no longer would be protecting, based on their interpretation, certain endangered species, but would be facilitating extraction of resources from the ground. I mean, they literally have a rule that is going to facilitate resource extraction as opposed to the mandate of the statute, which is protecting species. And you're pointing out that they've appointed someone who's going to be selling off public lands. At the EPA, literally, this was a couple of years ago, I don't know if the person's still there, appointed someone to the EPA who had done a paper saying that the air was too clean and that it was hurting American kids and developing immunity. A friend of mine tweeted out, where do they find these people? So the president is engaged in a politics of distraction, of ginning up anger based on race, based on divisions on immigration. Meanwhile, he has appointed people in these agencies who are doing systematic damage to our environment, to health standards, to labor standards, to our economy for workers. And I agree with you that needs a lot more coverage.
Congressman Ro Khanna is with us for the hour, taking your calls here on the Thom Hartmann Program. Congressman Khanna represents the 17th District of California. His website, Khanna, KHANNA.house.gov. He is the vice chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus also. And you can tweet him at Rep. Ro Khanna. We'll be right back with more of your calls from Congressman Khanna.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Congressman Ro Khanna with us for the hour here on the Thom Hartmann Program on Anything Goes Friday. We'll be back. And welcome back. Leslie in Central Square, New York. Hey, Leslie, thanks for watching Free Speech TV. You're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Hi, Congressman. My name's Les, and I have to talk about something very, very important to all of us, and that's the fact that the Americans have been being brainwashed for 30 years by Fox News and Limbo and all them. There's only one way to stop it, and that's the fairness doctrine. It has to be put back in. None of the Democrats bring it up because they're taking corporate money. Would you please address this? Thank you.
Well, thank you, Austin. I completely agree with you on the fairness doctrine. I mean, people are complaining about social media, and social media certainly has some of its problems in terms of inciting violence or having bias. But one of the big problems is cable news. And Grenko at Stanford did a study that showed that the greatest polarization and misinformation in the 2016 election was by cable news. There ought to be a fairness doctrine, which simply requires a news channel that gets spectrum from the United States government, that gets our tax dollars subsidizing their spectrum, to air alternative perspectives or fair perspectives. So I completely support that.
Yeah, just FYI, the old fairness doctrine only said two things. Number one, that in order to renew your license every year, and I started in broadcasting in 1968. I was a DJ for 3 years. I did news for 7 years back in Michigan in the 60s and 70s, and I'm real familiar with this. The Fairness Doctrine, number one, said that you must program in the public interest. That was the phrase. And what that was interpreted to mean was not the public service announcements. It was that there was news at the top of every hour, and that news was, free of bias and it was actual news. And that's why all the networks lost money on their news divisions, because they had to actually provide real news. And within 6 months of Reagan repealing the Fairness Doctrine in '87, CBS had moved their news division under their vice president of programming. And the other two networks followed within the year. So that kind of blew that up. And then the second part of the Fairness Doctrine was that when a station, and this was a common thing, that I worked at a TV station in Lansing, Michigan, that 3 times a week, the owner of the station would come on and he would read a little editorial and take a position, typically a political position. And because he was representing the station, he was the owner of the station, there had to be an equal amount of time. He would do 3 minutes, and then we would have a local politician on who disagreed with him, who would do his three minutes as a rebuttal. But if it wasn't the owner or management of the station expressing an opinion, the station could have run right-wing talk radio all day long, or they could have run left-wing talk radio all day long. The Fairness Doctrine never required balance in programming. And personally, I think that's a good thing, because I'm not sure I want the government being an arbiter of whether I'm right-wing, left-wing, or what. Does that make sense, Congressman?
It completely makes sense. I mean, I think that I did not realize your first part of the Fairness Doctrine, which it doesn't just require someone else to be there as a alternative, but it actually required a fair and objective telling of the news. I mean,
that's right.
I think that would be great.
Yeah, there you go. We'll be back. Congressman Ro Khanna is with us for the hour, taking your calls. It's 20 minutes past the hour. Stick around. Every day here on the Thom Hartmann Program, Louise and I and our team, Sean, Nate, Shira, Dave, Chase, Sue, Nigel, Ron, we all work to put together the very, very best show we possibly can. And there's an enormous amount of work that goes into the show. And one of the things that comes out of that is a lot of content, a lot of specific information that we go through and we dig out and, we want to share with you. And Sue puts that into our newsletter every week. And I think you will, if you don't already receive our newsletter, it comes in email every day, about an hour after we're off the air, or maybe a couple hours after we're off the air. And Sue goes through and pulls literally every link to every story that we talked about and puts it into the newsletter. It's free. We don't sell the list or anything. You complete safety and security. There's no charge. There's no nothing. Just, plug in your email address over at thomhartmann.com. And you get signed up for the newsletter. It's all fairly obvious. You'll see it on the website. So check it out, thomhartmann.com. Thank you.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Welcome back. Congressman Ro Khanna taking your calls for the hour here on the Thom Hartmann Program. And Otis in Yorktown, Virginia. You're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Appreciate it. I'm going to try to make this as quick as I can. He asked a question about why would the owners not be arrested during the Mississippi thing. $3 million lawsuit when people tried to unionize. I'm going to make the prediction in 12 to 18 months, the poultry industry will try to do the same thing Smithfield Packing did several years ago. They're going to be lobbying Congress to figure out a way to have that processing done offshore and then shipping food back to us. Those owners use ICE to disrupt a labor dispute that they were losing in.
Is that what was going? You're saying right now?
Fascinating. Yeah.
Otis?
Yes, I am, because they lost a $3 million suit and then turned around after the other people showed up to work after the ICE sweep. They fired another 100 workers. Now, I'm saying to you, corporate industry does nothing without looking forward, and in 12 to 18 months, they'll be lobbying this Congress or the next to try to figure out how to do offshoring and eliminate these jobs domestically completely.
Congressman? Sorry, I jumped in there.
That is fascinating. That's the first I've heard of that, and I'm going to look into it. But you're actually right to say that these employers have total impunity. They're the ones who have help wanted signs at our border. They're the ones who are recruiting folks knowingly, and then they suffer no consequence. And then you're adding an other layer to it, that perhaps they are the ones who are going after the undocumented population if the undocumented population is engaged in union organizing or engaged in advocating for their rights. It is totally appalling to me. It already was appalling to me that you had ICE going in there and raiding employees, parents with kids, and not doing anything to the employers. And if we now find out that it's actually involved labor violations that the employer was committing, that's just outrageous. So I'm going to try to get more facts on what you said, and I appreciate your raising it.
Pete in Seattle, you're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Yeah, hi. I'm talking about the employers that need to be held responsible. They hire these people. Do they take out withholding tax and Social Security tax and Medicare tax as they're legally required to do for those employees? And if they don't, what happens to that money? They stick it in their pocket or they send it to the government?
Pete, that's a great question. My assumption is that they are taking out those taxes. In some cases, maybe they're cooking the books and aren't. But many of them may, even if they're taking out the taxes, they are not, they're paying lower wages, because that's why they are going and trying to get these folks who are undocumented. They don't want to often deal with unions. It was a union busting technique, and they don't want to pay higher wages. And Tom has written extensively about this, and we've talked about it online, but it's really worth getting his perspective on this, because he believes, if I understand him correct, and Tom, feel free to chime in, that in 1986, when the Immigration Reform Act, when the deal happened, Reagan basically, with a wink and a nod, refused to told his administration to stop enforcing the provisions against employers. And big business loved it, and that was part of the whole immigration deal.
Yeah, and outside of a couple of high-profile cases, and probably the highest-profile one was the big 7-Eleven raid about a year and a half ago, which was principally targeting people who were immigrants themselves who owned 7-Eleven franchises, but they were legal immigrants. But then they went after the undocumented employees. The other thing is that in most cases, particularly with these big companies, these people are paying Social Security taxes, but they're paying them against phony Social Security numbers. And in the case of Donald Trump's properties, well, one of the things we learned is that Trump's employees, that is his management, were actually providing the phony Social Security numbers to the undocumented workers at the Trump properties. And so these people pay into Social Security, but they can never make a claim against it. Social Security actually is getting billions of dollars a year from undocumented workers. That is arguably strengthening Social Security, but it's not a good thing. So that's what I know about.
I appreciate that, Tom.
Yeah. So we're going to hit a break here in about 3 seconds. So Congressman Ro Khanna is taking your calls for the hour. Congressman Khanna is the vice chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus. He represents the 17th District of California. He is his website is Khanna, KHANNA.house.gov. You can visit him there and learn all about it. And if you would like to speak with him on Twitter, Rep. Ro Khanna, REPROKHANNA is his Twitter handle. We'll be back with more of your calls for Congressman Khanna.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Coming up on 28 minutes past the hour. We'll be back with your calls for Congressman Khanna right after this. Years of strategy and struggle against the prison industrial complex. It's a collection of essays. This one is by David Gilbert on page 31, titled "The System Within the System, the Prison Industrial Complex and Imperialism." For those of us held behind locked gates within the walls and fences topped with razor wire, the corrections regime is the system that works tirelessly to impose total control over every aspect of our lives. Yet as ponderous and powerful as prisons are, they're only one part, a central girder, of a much bigger and more foreboding house of horrors, which can most accurately be named imperialism. The structural needs of the larger edifice set the specifications for the size and position of the girder. The strength of the girder helps determine how long the building itself will stand. We can't understand the explosion of imprisonment in the United States since 1971 without looking at an imperialism's urgent needs and goals of that period. By the same token, we can't develop an effective program around the prison industrial complex without grappling with the stresses and trends of the larger system of imperial rule. To be clear, before you take time to read this chapter, I don't offer any brilliant ideas on strategy. Those will most likely emerge from the organizing and activist efforts themselves. However, some of the concerns discussed may raise questions that go into forming strategy. I definitely look forward to learning from the dialogues that this generates on these issues. Imperialism may sound like the kind of rhetoric we want to avoid, but it's one word that needs to be rescued as the best way to name the system that rules over us. The basis of imperialism is the relentless quest for profits around the globe. Its most striking characteristic is the colossal and grotesque polarization of wealth. That polarization happens between nations, between the rich countries of the North and the impoverished ones of the global South, the impoverished countries of Africa, Latin America, and parts of Asia, and at the same time within each country based on class, race, and gender. The poles of dazzling wealth and abject poverty are intimately linked, as the former results from the ruthless plunder of the latter. This system is built on and intensifies all the major forms of oppression, patriarchy, capitalism, and white supremacy, all of which are structurally central. At the same time, imperialism highlights the global character of the system in a way that explains why the most intense oppression and resistance have been in the South, and that also provides the context for why the liberation struggles of the various people of color have been in the forefront within the U.S. There's no way to capture what the system costs in human life and potential, the pain and loss for all of us. Close to 1 billion human beings suffer chronic hunger, while another 2 billion face nutritional deficiencies. 1 billion lack access to clean drinking water. Just looking at children under the age of 5, imperialism is a holocaust in progress. Over 9 million die every year from easily preventable causes associated with poverty. The price for future generations may be even more severe as the rapaciousness of this global frenzy for profits threatens the very ecological basis for sustaining human life on any scale on our planet. Since most people won't accept living in squalor amid plenty, imperialism entails both the most sophisticated and the most brutal forms of social control. Its most salient feature is war after war after war, mainly against the peoples of the South. The domestic front line of such repression is a truly violent and harmful prison industrial complex. Today, 2,300,000 people are held behind bars, about 7 times the number in 1971. That explosion was unprecedented, coming after a 70-year period when the rates of imprisonment had remained more or less constant. This dramatic change did not result from some sudden skyrocketing of criminal activity, but rather from a radical expansion of what was designated as a crime and a draconian increase in the punishments for those crimes. Such extreme measures were driven by considerations way beyond criminal justice and often at cross purposes to the proclaimed goal of public safety. These destructive changes were born from crisis, one much more severe and protracted than the periodic ups and downs of the business cycles that occur over a roughly 10-year period, but rather a situation that threatened the very survival of the system. Such structural crises occur because capitalism is by its nature unstable. The economy is vast and complicated, but the major decisions are made by a tiny corporate and financial elite, with each thinking only of his own profits. When a structural crisis develops, the long-term institutional arrangements that assured a reliable flow of profits and the rule of capital no longer function. One dramatic example was the Great Depression of the 1930s, followed by World War II. At the end of that period, a new set of international institutions, such as the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank, were created. At the same time, a new deal was hammered out for the terms of the bargain between capital and labor within the U.S. Those arrangements worked well for capital until they broke down a generation later. That new structural crisis, which emerged between 1968 and 73, is the seedbed for the burgeoning of the prison industrial complex and many related changes in U.S. history. The first and most obvious signs were political, as the resistance to imperialism crested in 1968. Abolition now.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Welcome back, Congressman Ro Khanna, taking your calls for the hour here on the Thom Hartmann Program. And Congressman Khanna, you with us?
Yes, I am.
Okay, great. Terry in Newburgh, Oregon, you're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Well, thank you. I appreciate the opportunity. Congressman Khanna, Congress had voted to censure Wilbur Roth and William Barr, I guess, with criminal contempt. And I'm wondering, are these two hideous individuals ever going to face any consequence for that vote?
Well, Terry, I am on the Oversight Committee. We voted to censor them, and then they have been referred to the House Committee. I am not, I should get you the facts if I want to be accurate, whether the House has actually had that vote yet on the criminal contempt or not. I am not sure if we voted at the House level. I know we did on the Oversight Committee. But once we do vote at the House level, and we may have, I'll get those facts to you if you call our office, the challenge is then the enforceability. And a lot of times what happens in the past, in the few instances where someone has been held in contempt, it's a black mark on their record, that stays with them for life, but there isn't necessarily something that puts them in jail. Now, most people don't want to be held in contempt of Congress. It hurts them in getting a future job. It hurts them in their reputation. But these individuals are shameless. They don't care. So I suppose the Speaker could technically arrest someone for contempt of Congress. You could send the Sergeant of Arms, but that's never happened.
Wendy in Parkland, Florida. You're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Hi, Congressman. There was a call a little while back where the woman asked you about all of the agencies and the people being appointed who their goal is to destroy the agencies and everything that they stand for. And with all due respect, I don't think you answered her question as to what Congress can actually do about these appointments. Most of them are acting. They're not actually confirmed. The ones that are confirmed, their goal is still to destroy the agencies that they're appointed to. So I'd like to know if there is anything that Congress can do other than your answer was to get more coverage, but I don't think that that's the answer that she was looking for. It's not the answer that I'm looking for.
Well, I appreciate that, Wendy. Wendy, there's very little Congress can do in an executive branch position that is not confirmed by the Senate. We can exercise oversight. So when there is an executive branch that is clearly violating the law, we can try to expose that and refer that as a criminal matter, or refer that to an inspector general, or expose it to the public. We could, I suppose, cut off funding, but in many of these cases, the places you would be cutting off funding are actually the productive parts of the government. So if you wanted to cut off funding to the Interior Department because they are limiting the scope of the Endangered Species Act interpretation, you would actually be hurting any enforcement of the Endangered Species Act. So blanket cutting off of funding is also not possible when you have an administration that is intent on appointing appointees who are going to deregulate or reduce regulation. You could go to the courts, which a number of folks have been going, but the courts in the past have been fairly deferential to administrative oversight. So I'm not trying to avoid your question other than to say this is why elections matter so much and why it matters who the President of the United States is, and they get to appoint people who have relatively wide latitude in the interpretation of agencies. But we in Congress are doing everything we can, both with oversight and with conditioning funding where we can, to prevent these abuses.
Richard in Naples, Florida. You're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Wow. Good afternoon, Tom and Congressman Khanna. Tom, just by way of background, sometime not too long ago, Section 8 was mentioned in your program, and you didn't know where that came from. It's now in the news again, of course, and I want to ask the congressman about this, too.
It came out of the Great Society, didn't it, Richard? Lyndon Johnson.
I am the person. I'm the person. Me personally, I'm the founder of Section 8. I just thought I found that interesting myself when all this story is going around, and I thought, hey, I'll talk to Tom and the congressman about this and ask you both really to what extent, what is the limits that or is there a limit to what this person, Donald Trump, would do, assuming he's not reelected?
Thanks, Rick. A limit in terms of holding on to power?
Yeah, we were having a conversation in the previous hour about what, somebody said, what do we do if Donald Trump refuses to leave office if he loses? And I said, I don't think that's going to happen. I think either he's going to become a pariah within the Republican Party and Fox News won't take his calls anymore and he's going to, slowly sink into prison in New York State, or he's going to be embraced by the Republican Party and Fox News. He's going to get his own show on Fox News, and he's going to become the television version of Rush Limbaugh and become a formidable force. And I know, and I'm sure that would be his goal. Curious your thoughts.
Yeah, and I also think, look, we have to remember that the United States House of Representatives and the United States Senate, with Vice President Biden presiding, certified the last election. And in fact, when Pramila Jayapal and a few Congress people wanted to raise an objection, the Vice President didn't even recognize those objections. So it was a unanimous certification of the election. If you have a situation where you have the Senate and the House of Representatives unanimously certifying an election of whoever Trump's challenger is, whoever the nominee is, then I cannot imagine a situation where our military would not align with what the Constitution requires, which is the certified winner. And Trump would not be in office. I mean, he wouldn't be allowed to stay in office. The new president would be whoever the House and Senate certifies. So it's important to realize, as much as I believe, I'm supporting the impeachment inquiry, as much as I believe that there was misconduct, Trump was certified as the president of the United States.
What happens if
the House and Senate?
If this stuff about voting machines not being accurate and all this stuff has been percolating for a long time, mostly on the left, pointing out redshift and what like that. But what if there are Republicans in the Senate who control the Senate? Let's say, a progressive, Bernie, Elizabeth Warren, somebody like that, a real progressive gets the nomination and gets elected, and the Republicans in the Senate, with Coke money flowing out of their pockets, say, no, we're not going to certify this election. And so it doesn't get certified by the Senate. What happens then?
Well, then we'd have a constitutional crisis. I wouldn't put it past the Republicans. I was going to say I don't think that will happen. There at least will be some people who believe in not getting us into a full-fledged constitutional crisis. But then we would literally have a constitutional crisis.
Yeah, but look at what they did with Merrick Garland.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I could, that really would be precipitating a crisis in this nation. And I could see if it was a close election, the other side people on the other side doing that. I certainly could see McConnell playing hardball, and then it goes to the Supreme Court, and of course we saw what happened with Bush v. Gore. So the final arbiter, I suppose, in that situation would be the Supreme Court.
Yeah. Boy, we live in interesting times, Congressman. Marty.
We really do.
Marty.
Well, I was going to tell you.
Yeah, go ahead.
Say there's some regard on the other side for the process, but I totally lost faith in that when I was on the Armed Services Committee, and Tom, how much I oppose defense budgets. And my first term of the Congress, they told me, Ro, You can vote against the defense budget and defense increases when it comes to the floor. In committee, everyone votes for getting it through the committee because that's just what we do to support our troops, and then we make our point on the floor. And so I did what our committee ranking member at the time said, and I voted to get the defense budget through the committee, as did every single Democrat. It passed unanimously. And then on the floor, I voted against the bill because I said, it's crazy, these defense increases. Well, this time, now that we're in the majority, guess what? The Republicans, for the first time ever, they don't even vote for our defense bill to get past the committee. And what about all the arguments that, it's for the troops? Totally doesn't matter. We're not voting for a defense bill because it's got protections for transgender individuals. It's got protection for women. I mean, the hypocrisy on that side is just stunning.
Yeah, it's breathtaking. Marty in Evergreen Park, Illinois. You're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Hey, Tom. Thank you for taking my call, and thank you, Congressman. As you guys both know, one of the quotes on the Statue of Liberty is, "Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free." Recently, Ken Cuccinelli, the acting head of U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, made an addendum to that, and saying that basically, give me your tired, your poor, who can stand on their own 2 feet and will not become a public charge. So I wanted to get the congressman's thoughts on this premise and see if Congress can do anything to ensure that legal immigrants have access to desperately needed public benefits that they're entitled to.
Thank you.
Marty, I appreciate your raising this. It's an appalling decision. It's an appalling decision to say that legal immigrants coming to this country will face discrimination and can't get the public benefits that every other person in this country is entitled to just because they are coming here as immigrants and not as Americans. And, it was my mom was very emotional about the whole thing because if you read the whole rule, one of the most egregious parts of the rule.
Congressman, can we pick this up on the other side?
Sure.
I'm sorry.
Absolutely.
This is a hard break that I can't control.
Yes, of course.
Yeah. We'll be back. It's 45 minutes past the hour here on the Thom Hartmann Program. Congressman Ro Khanna taking your calls.
Thanks.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Congressman Khanna is the vice chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus. He represents the 17th District of California in the U.S. House of Representatives. Khanna.house.gov is his website. And welcome back. Congressman, you want to finish your thoughts? I'm sorry about that.
No, sure. Well, Marty raises a point where one of the most egregious things about the public charge rule is if you flip through it, and it's a long, lengthy rule, they actually make a statement that one of the factors you should consider whether to allow an immigrant in or not is their wealth. And the reason that you should consider their wealth is because if they don't have enough money, then they may become a public burden. And my mom literally texted me. She said, we came to this country with 2 suitcases. And we had, and we didn't have any money. We had about $8. And so the amount of people who would not have been allowed into this country who were coming through the process, if you had a wealth test, it would be staggering. And it's offensive to everything this country stands for.
Yeah. Amen. Michelle in District Heights, Maryland. Hey, Michelle. You're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Hi, Professor Hartmann. How are you today?
I'm well. I'm not a professor. Thank you.
I always learn something from you, so that's
written enough
an honorarium that I give you.
I'm sure you're an honorary professor somewhere.
That's right. Thank you, and thank you, Congressman Khanna. My question was really a follow-up to the previous remarks about what can be done about all of the cabinet members serving in acting positions. And my question is, would it be possible to craft legislation that says that no cabinet member can serve for a period of longer than, say, 90 days in an acting position without being brought for confirmation before the Senate?
That's a good idea. I mean, I think it's worth exploring. I mean, the challenge has been how do we get some of these folks confirmed and yet not have people who are just extreme ideologues like who Trump's putting in there, and having them have to go through Senate confirmation after a certain number of days. I mean, I think that's a reasonable proposal.
Mark in San Francisco. Mark, we have just a minute and a half to the break. Quick question, please.
Yes, the Republicans always say these tax cuts will pay for themselves, and they never do. And I'd like to have the Democrats respond by saying we have to undo these tax cuts that you do and not put it on the middle class and the poor to pay for them. We have nothing left to give. The middle class is broke.
Tommy, you're absolutely right. Look, there are our deficits, which the Republicans rail against, are caused by three main things. And it's not what they lead you to believe it is. It's not Social Security or Medicare. Here are the three causes of our current deficits. First, it was the Bush tax cut, which was largely geared to people who were in the 1%, $1.5 trillion. Then it was the war in Iraq and Afghanistan, which has cost us trillions of dollars. And then it's been the Trump tax cut, which was again geared towards the 1%. That is the entire deficit. And that money could have gone instead to health care. It could have gone to education. It could have gone to infrastructure. It could have gone into job creation. It could have gone into a tax credit for working class Americans, like the earned income tax credit. So the entire fiscal mess has been caused by deliberate tax policies by the Republicans.
Remarkable. That's it's just amazing. We'll be back with Congressman Ro Khanna in just a moment. In just 1 minute, I've got to read a commercial on our for-profit side. We'll be right back. It's 49 minutes past the hour. Every day here on the Thom Hartmann Program, Louise and I and our team, Sean, Nate, Shira, Dave, Chase, Sue, Nigel, Ron, we all work to put together the very, very best show we possibly can. And there's an enormous amount of work that goes into the show. And one of the things that comes out of that is a lot of content, a lot of specific information that we go through and we dig out and, we want to share with you. And Sue puts that into our newsletter every week. And I think you will, if you don't already receive our newsletter, it comes in email every day, about an hour after we're off the air, or maybe a couple hours after we're off the air. And Sue goes through and pulls literally every link to every story that we talked about and puts it into the newsletter. It's free. We don't sell a list or anything. You complete safety and security. There's no charge. There's no nothing. Just, plug in your email address over at thomhartmann.com and you get signed up for the newsletter. It's all fairly obvious. You'll see it on the website. So check it out, thomhartmann.com. Thank you.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Welcome back. Congressman Ro Khanna taking your calls for the hour. And Zach in Topeka, Kansas. You're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Thank you for taking my call. I got an interesting question. It's kind of on all topics in general. Worker co-ops. That's pretty much our best defense and offense against the oligarchy that we live under. I'm wondering if you have heard of them, or if you have, are going to introduce some legislation to try to get those going throughout the country.
I have, and I actually have planning on working on legislation to make it easier for business owners who are retiring, because there are many of those actually in my district, to convert into a worker co-op where the ownership goes to the employees and they become employee-owned. There's also separately the ESOP companies where workers have some share of the stock and some share of profits. But models which either have worker-owned businesses, particularly small businesses, or worker equity or shareholder value, I think are incredibly successful and give people a lot more stake in the economy.
Walter in West Stockbridge, Massachusetts. You're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Taking it off speaker. Hello?
Walter?
Yes. The two-party system will never work because the Republicans just have to block everything the Democrats want to do, and the Santa Claus theory you have, and guys with white hats and black hats will oppose each other. What needs to be done is the billionaires that want to be taxed higher need to start a third party, because a third party will keep one party in balance.
Okay, Walter. I'm not sure that was a question, Congressman Khanna, but you want to express
Walter,
your thoughts?
I support third parties. I support fourth parties. I support all a democracy that's as robust as possible. But I'm a little bit more optimistic than you may be in terms of a progressive future. I do think at some point, and hopefully this cycle, we're going to see someone like Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren win the presidency and win the Senate, and we're going to have another progressive moment. Look, the last time we had a progressive moment in 2008 to 2010, and I appreciate the Affordable Care Act, but I think if, in retrospect, we would have gotten rid of the filibuster, and we would have done immigration reform, and we would have done climate change, and we would have done a public option, and I think the next time the stars align, the progressives are not going to blow it.
Mick in Santa Cruz, California. You're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Hello. Thank you for taking my call. I'm calling about the number of people I view homeless or houseless throughout the West Coast. And in your district particularly, what I see is the disparity due to the financial distribution. Also, I see as a result of that, I see more people being homeless because of the high cost of rents in your area.
Mick, sorry to push you along here, but we only have 2 minutes left. What's your question?
My question is, what is his approach to getting more homes for the homeless up and down the West Coast?
Thank you.
Well, Nick, I appreciate it. I do think the homelessness is a particular problem in Los Angeles and San Francisco, most acute, and then it has increased even in Silicon Valley. About 45% of the homeless in our area are because of mental health issues or disabilities, but there's about a 30% or so who are there because they have lost their job. Now, California doesn't have New York's law. New York has a law which says that you have a right to basic shelter. I think that would be good for the state to adopt, so you at least have the right to shelter. But I believe in the home first policy, which is statistically shown that you have to put people in a home and help them get to complete services to get back on their feet. We need more investments in affordable homes in the region, and more construction of affordable homes, and more investment in the wraparound services that homeless need. So these are two needs that the region has.
Congressman, we have only about 50 seconds till the end of the hour. It wouldn't be fair to a caller, and probably couldn't finish it. So anyhow, I'm wondering what you think we should be paying attention to is in the next week or two until the next time you're on the program. Where should we be focusing our activism, and what should we be watching?
Well, Tom, I think we need to be looking at this impeachment inquiry that Nadler is going to start and see what is going to be coming of that. We need to be continuing to demand action on gun violence. I mean, after El Paso and Dayton, the House has passed two of these background check bills and passed legislation to limit magazine capacity. We need now the Senate to act, and we need the House to act even in more bold ways once we're back.
And you're anticipating that happening?
I do, and certainly from the House's perspective, I do, but we got to put pressure on the Senate as well.
That's great. Congressman Ro Khanna, thank you so much for being with us this hour.
Thank you.
Great talking with you. We'll be back with, actually, Senator Sanders is going to drop by and say hi, and then we'll be going back to Anything Goes Friday. So stick around. It's coming up on the top of the hour here on the Thom Hartmann Program, the True People's Meeting.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
book for the book report today. Our book for the book report today is Taking Bullets, Terrorism and Black Life in 21st Century America, Confronting White Nationalism, Supremacy, Privilege, Plutocracy, and Oligarchy, a Poet's Representation and Challenge by Haki R. Madhubuti. He writes, this is from the chapter, page 27, the chapter Terror in the Midst of Prayer and Empire. In our perpetual state of national mourning, where our eyes are watered out and our hearts cease to heal at the rate the Creator meant them to, we hold hands in profound silence as we remember the Mother Emanuel 9 of Charleston, South Carolina, those 9 mothers, fathers, sisters, and brothers. Even before burying, before black earth covered their caskets, too many ministers, media pundits, and plain white and black folks downgraded the terror that quickened their deaths of our finest in this land to the mental illness and race hatred, in quotes, of a single young white man. He may have acted alone, but he was not alone in his thinking, encouragement, gathering of arms, warped consciousness, confirmation, or ahistorical views, and yeses from the millions in the nation who proudly wear and display the Confederate flag above their hearts and fly it in all of its traitorous glory over a state capitol and other institutions. Again, we find ourselves at war with history and culture, entertaining another call for a national conversation on race and a president weary of trying to make sense of and comfort the grief-stricken nation with words from the highest office of the land. This was written while Obama was president. These are the facts, not an opinion or the ignorant ranting of compromised preachers and television pundits. A 21-year-old white man, a citizen of South Carolina, walked into the sacred and spiritual home of the Emmanuel African Methodist Episcopal Church of Charleston, the historic home of black liberation fighter Denmark Vesey, and fatally killed 9 of its members, including the pastor, during Bible study. This was a pure act of domestic terrorism. A modern-day lynching by a young white nationalist who coolly and calmly assassinated 9 black members of Mother Emanuel. Domestic violence and acts of terrorism are on the rise in the United States, as detailed by Charles Kurzman and Daniel Schanzer in their New York Times op-ed, The Other Threat, where they state that, quote, the main terrorist threat in the United States is not from violent Muslim extremists, but from right-wing extremists, end quote. In their national research, local police agencies across the country identified, quote, the militias, neo-Nazis, and sovereign citizens as the major threat the nation faces in regard to extremism, end quote. All of this is homegrown with international connections. Morris Dees and J. Richard Cohen of the Southern Poverty Law Center also writes in the New York Times article, Racists Without Borders, that, quote, Americans tend to view attacks like the mass murder in Charleston as isolated hate crimes, the work of a deranged racist or a group of zealots lashing out in anger unconnected to a broader movement. This view we can no longer afford to indulge. When, according to survivors, Mr. Roof told the victims at the prayer meeting that black people were, quote, taking over the country, he was expressing sentiments that unite white nationalists from the United States and Canada to Europe, Australia, and New Zealand. Unlike those of the Civil Rights era, whose main goal was to maintain Jim Crow in the American South, today's white supremacists don't see borders. They see a white tribe under attack by people of color across the globe. The end of white rule in Rhodesia, now Zimbabwe, and South Africa, they believe, foreshadowed an apocalyptic future for all white people, a white genocide that must be stopped before it's too late. End of quote. The internationalization of terrorism is not a foreign theory in today's social media world. Dees and Cohen will be speaking at a conference in Budapest about this transnational white supremacism that is emerging as the world grows more connected technologically. The message of white genocide is spreading. Also, David J. Whitaker's Terrorism, Understanding the Global Threat, gives another view. Clearly, our rush to forgive this mass murderer within 96 hours of this supreme tragedy is misguided, anti-human, and does not allow for properly grieving the fallen. As perfectly scripted, displaying the permanent effectiveness of Christian acculturation on the Sunday, June 21st, 2015 morning services of Mother Emanuel Church, the black Christians out-Christianed their white brothers and sisters. Before the morning sermon, the presiding elder, Reverend Norvell Goff Sr., found it necessary to thank the local, state, and federal law enforcement agencies for doing their job. He also stated, quote, "A lot of folks expected us to do something strange and break out in a riot. Well, they just don't know us. We are people of faith," end quote. I find this statement inappropriate, insensitive, and ahistorical, implying, whether he meant it or not, that the recent uprising and rebellions in Ferguson, New York, Cleveland, and other parts of the nation were riots and did not include black people of faith, and that somehow they were strange in their social, political, and economic activism. Informed people do not riot against injustice or white terrorism. They study, organize, and strategically struggle at all levels, in the streets, on the campus, in front of the White House, and in corporate boardrooms. Dylan Roof stated his stated intentions were to start a race war, and informed black leadership understands that we cannot pray this away or appeal to any law enforcement agency that all across the country, including Charleston, has been seriously compromised. To label black reaction to murder, terrorism, deep unemployment, substandard housing, etc., as riot is to blame the victim. The book, Taking Bullets. You know, every day here on the Thom Hartmann Program, Louise and I and our team, Sean, Nate, Shira, Dave, Chase, Sue, Nigel, Ron, we all work to put together the very, very best show we possibly can. And there's an enormous amount of work that goes into the show. And one of the things that comes out of that is a lot of content, a lot of specific information that we go through and we dig out and, you know, we want to share with you. And Sue puts that into our newsletter every week. And I think you will, if you don't already receive our newsletter, it comes in email every day, about an hour after we're off the air, or maybe a couple hours after we're off the air. And Sue goes through and pulls literally every link to every story that we talked about and puts it into the newsletter. It's free. We don't sell the list or anything. You complete safety and security. There's no charge. There's no nothing. Just, you know, plug in your email address over at thomhartmann.com and you get signed up for the newsletter. It's all fairly obvious. You'll see it on the website. So check it out, thomhartmann.com. Thank you.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. We're going to get back into Anything Goes Friday in just a moment. But first, Senator Bernie Sanders dropped by. Hey, Senator, welcome back to the program.
Hey, good to be with you, Tom. How are you?
I am well. The latest news thing that flew by me that had your name attached to it, not from you, but, you know, in the news, was your talking back to Donald Trump and Benjamin Netanyahu. I'm curious your thoughts on that, and also what else is going on in the world today that you would like to comment on.
There are one or two minor things going on in the world today, I think. But you know, in terms of Netanyahu and the Rashida and Ilan, members of the United States Congress, it just seems to me to be absurd that Israel and Netanyahu thinks that they can deny a United States congressperson the right to visit their country. I have been to Israel numerous times. I've been all over the world. And members of Congress are welcome and invited into those countries to learn about what's going on, to speak to the leaders and so forth. And the idea that two members of the United States Congress, maybe because of their religion, they're Muslim, maybe because of their political views, they're progressive, they are denied access to Israel is unacceptable. And what I said yesterday, and I'll repeat, the United States provides billions and billions of dollars in aid to Israel. And if Israel does not think that members of the United States Congress should be able to visit their country, maybe they want to politely refuse to accept any more money from this country. So that's the bottom line. And I think what Netanyahu is doing, what Trump has done on this issue, is racist, is outrageous, it is unacceptable, and it's one more reason why we have to make sure that Trump is not reelected to the presidency.
Yeah, I'm with you there. Well, what else is on your radar screen these days?
Well, there's a lot that's on. I mean, we've been running all over the country. And I'll tell you something that I'm feeling very good about. I think the message of Medicare for All is resonating very strongly all across America. And it's not just all of the polling that I've been seeing, which says that a majority of the American people, when they understand the issue, now support Medicare for All. But I think it has everything to do with the incredible dysfunctionality and incredible waste of the current healthcare system. It is very hard for our opponents to defend the system in which we are spending, Tom, and this is an important point not made often enough, we are spending twice as much per capita on healthcare as do the people of any other industrialized nation. We're spending almost $11,000 a year. And for that, what we end up with is some 87 million Americans are underinsured or uninsured completely. We have 30,000 people every year die because they don't get to a doctor when they should. Unbelievably, this is really quite unbelievable. On top of all of that, you got 500,000 people go bankrupt in America because they cannot pay off their incredible medical bills that they have for a serious illness. So you take a step back and you think, how does it happen that families get ruined financially for what crime did they commit? And the crime they committed, I guess, is somebody in the family got cancer or heart disease or some other terrible illness. That's insane. So I think people catch on to the fact that a Medicare for All program, the legislation I've introduced in the Senate, would guarantee health care to all people with no deductibles, no co-payments, no out-of-pocket expenses. We'd expand benefits to include dental care, hearing aids, eyeglasses. And at the end of the day, after a 4-year phase-in, it will cost substantially less per person for health care as we are now paying. Because right now, we're paying for it with premiums and out-of-pocket expenses and co-payments. And we're paying for it in some ways with people dying because they can't get to a hospital when they need. So I'm very excited about the kind of progress that we're making on Medicare for All.
That's good news.
It is. And the other part of that equation is we are seeing more and more consciousness about the greed and illegal behavior of the pharmaceutical industry, where you have a handful of corporations, in many cases, in insulin, for example, controlling the price of a product and charging us 10 times more than our Canadian neighbors are paying. And one of the things that Medicare for All will do is cap the amount of money that we spend for prescription drugs at $200 per person. And we do that by substantially lowering the cost of prescription drugs in this country, by having Medicare negotiate prices with the drug companies and looking what other countries are paying. So we are going to be taking on the insurance companies. We're going to move to Medicare for All. We're going to take on the pharmaceutical industry. We're going to cut their prices very substantially. And I think we're making some progress in that area.
Now, during the Bush administration, they, when they passed this Medicare Part D thing with Billy Townsend, promoting it, I know you were speaking out loudly on this program, actually, about this. The law says that the Medicare, which is arguably the largest purchaser of pharmaceuticals in the United States, may not negotiate prices. They have to pay full retail. So if that...
And Tom, remind the audience, just in case some of them may have forgotten, who Billy Townsend was then a congressman from Louisiana.
Right. Yeah, he was a congressman.
And what did he do? Let me shock the people to tell what happened to Billy Townsend after he left the Congress.
Yeah, he got a job for, I think, $2 million a year as the head of PhRMA, the big lobbying group for the pharmaceutical industry.
Aren't we shocked by that?
Yeah. Well, not only that, he got a waiver from the Republican Speaker of the House, I forget who it was at the time, or which one it was, so that he could leave Congress a few months early to take this job.
Right. I mean, that's the corruption that you're dealing with in the Congress right now. Here's a guy who writes the drug bill, says that Medicare cannot negotiate prices. The result is the prices are far higher in the United States than any other country on earth. It's shock of all shocks. A little while later, he leaves Congress to go to work for the pharmaceutical industry. And over the years, he made a whole lot of money working for that industry. But that's what we're up against right now.
Yeah.
And what the point of the campaign that we're running is to tell the American people that we are not going to do the things that most Americans want, and that is move to Medicare for All, lower the cost of prescription drugs, break up the large banks on Wall Street, take on the fossil fuel industry, unless we have what amounts to a political revolution where millions of people understand that we've got to stand up and fight back, or else you continue to see the kinds of reality, the same as went on with Billy Townsend, and that is, the companies determine what happens rather than ordinary people.
Yeah. One of the other big issues that a lot of people are talking about is climate change. This is particularly a concern for younger people, although I would say, even us old farts, we have children and grandchildren, and we should be concerned about the fate and future of the world and the human race. Where is Congress at on doing anything about climate change? Obviously, Trump is nuts on this, but what are your thoughts?
Right.
Where do we go?
What you have, and it's the same stories, the same as the gun safety issues, the same. I caught the end of the segment you just did, but when we're talking about the cyber hacking into American elections and the need to protect us from Russian intervention or anybody else. On all of these issues, you have a Republican. Does the Democratic Party do enough? No. Does the Republican Party do anything? Absolutely not. So here is the issue of climate change. The leading scientists all over the world have told us that not only is climate change real, but it is already causing devastating problems. And they have told us, if we don't get our act together in the next 11 to 12 years, a very short period of time, that there will be underlined irreparable damage done in our country and around the world. We are talking about the future of the planet we call Earth, our home. And yet we have a president who doesn't acknowledge the reality of climate change. You got leadership in the United States Senate, Mitch McConnell and others, who have refused to bring up any serious legislation dealing with climate change, and they are threatening the entire planet. At the end of the day, what we have got to do is to understand that climate change, of course, is not just an American issue, it's a global issue. We need leadership in the White House, which will go out to the rest of the world and say, you know what? Maybe, just maybe, instead of spending $1.5 trillion every year on weapons of destruction designed to kill each other, maybe we want to spend those resources and more in taking on our common enemy, which is climate change. And maybe, just maybe, we can create throughout the world tens of millions of dollars transforming our energy system away from fossil fuels.
There you go. Senator Bernie Sanders. Senator, thanks so much for dropping by. It's great talking with you. It's always great having you on.
Okay, you too, Tom.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Yep, and we'll be back with Anything Goes Friday here on the Thom Hartmann Program, picking up your calls. I've got a story I got to tell you about what's going on. It's very interesting, kind of human interest, but also it shows the bizarreness of the Trump administration out of Santa Fe, New Mexico. Stick around.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
16 minutes past the hour on Anything Goes Friday here on the Thom Hartmann Program. And welcome back, Josh in Boulder, Colorado. Hey, Josh, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. I've called you in the past and asked about ending animal agriculture subsidies and educating people about plant-based diets.
And as you know, I'm in favor of both.
Totally in favor of both. So I took it upon myself to ask Congressman Pocan the same question similarly twice now, and he's diverted to talk about oil and gas. He specifically said I was pointing to one study and one type of gas release, but the IPCC report, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, comes from over 100 scientists from over 50 countries, and methane, the gas that I was talking about, is the number 2 source of greenhouse gas emissions, and the number 2 source in the U.S. Comes from cows. He also said, quote, focus on big polluting industries that make a lot of money polluting, and coal going to solar and wind is a much bigger transition than anything we can do. Now, I challenge Congressman Pocan because he's a co-sponsor of the Green New Deal. And if we can't get our most progressive congressman to even pay attention to the science, which is frustrating because we're always charging conservatives not paying attention to the science on climate change, but now the science is clearly saying that we need to change our global agricultural systems and our diets. And Bernie was just talking, and at the end he said we need to transform energy away from fossil fuels, and he should continue, and our agricultural system away from eating animals. How do we get anybody to start talking about this and paying attention to the science?
Josh, number one, fossil fuels are the largest contributor to climate change.
I don't disagree. I don't disagree.
And in fact, probably on the scope of 150 years, probably responsible for 95%, of climate change. If you take out the stuff that's, being released, the methane that's being released right now by our own warming, that was also caused by fossil fuels. So if you want to educate a member of Congress or the House or the Senate about the impact of animal agriculture, I would suggest that you get some good, tight, concise science, boil it down to no more than 3 pieces of paper, and mail it to their office. And with a very short, very polite cover letter that says, we talked about this on the Thom Hartmann program, and I just wanted you to see this, and give them, if they want to do a deep dive, give them links or give them sources for more information. But I can tell you, being on the receiving end of stuff, from people all the time, when somebody hands me, 35-page something or other about their particular issue, it's extremely unlikely I'm going to have the time to read that or dig into it, and particularly if I don't know the source of it. So I would suggest that rather than repeatedly calling the same person and asking the same question, and kind of getting a reputation as Johnny One Note, that you work to educate these folks, and it's not going to happen on a talk show. There's no way.
Of course not. But I wanted to bring the question to the forefront. I will absolutely be sending.
Well, he's heard you twice, and I'm guessing he's paying attention to it.
I'm done now. But I wanted to talk to you about it because you do seem to highlight these issues on your show.
Yeah, I'm well aware of it, and it's. I quit eating animals back, in 1968, and as a statement of opposition to the Vietnam War for nonviolence. People now are becoming vegetarians and vegans, in particular vegans, in order to make a statement about climate change, which is, a far bigger issue, frankly, than the Vietnam War. And I fully support that. Josh, thank you for the call. We'll be back. Every day here on the Thom Hartmann program, Louise and I and our team, Sean, Nate, Shira, Dave, Chase, Sue, Nigel, Ron, we all work to put together the very, very best show we possibly can. And there's an enormous amount of work that goes into the show. And one of the things that comes out of that is a lot of content, a lot of specific information that we go through and we dig out and, we want to share with you. And Sue puts that into our newsletter every week. And I think you will, if you don't already receive our newsletter, it comes in email every day, about an hour after we're off the air, or maybe a couple hours after we're off the air. And Sue goes through and pulls literally every link to every story that we talked about and puts it into the newsletter. It's free. We don't sell a list or anything. You complete safety and security. There's no charge. There's no nothing. Just, plug in your email address over at thomhartmann.com. And you get signed up for the newsletter. It's all fairly obvious. You'll see it on the website. So check it out, thomhartmann.com. Thank you.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
I mentioned this story out of Santa Fe, New Mexico. My old friend Jim Turr sent me this kind of heads up on this, and I thought, oh, fascinating stuff. The Santa Fe Plaza is, just this kind of beautiful walk-around space, and there's, local businesses there. And Roque Garcia, and my apologies if I'm mispronouncing his name, it's R-O-Q-U-E. Roque Garcia is this piece that Leah Cantor wrote for the Santa Fe Reporter. Is an institution on the Santa Fe Plaza. For nearly 30 years, he's served up steaming hot carnitas. His lunchtime regulars include many of the shop owners, bank clerks, and other locals who work in the establishments surrounding this public square. And then she goes on to quote him. He says, "People have been changing in the last year and a half. Now people are asking where I'm from." Now, keep in mind, this is a guy, although it wouldn't matter whether he was or not, this is a guy who's literally his grandparents, great-grandparents. I mean, he's a multi-generational Santa Fean. I mean, his family's been there forever. And he says, people are asking me where I'm from, shaking his head in indignation. He says, these people don't know me. They don't know my family. Used to be no one would ask you something like that. Everything has changed here in Santa Fe. And then, the article that Leah Cantor wrote gets into this story about this one guy in particular One man in particular seems on a personal mission to make Garcia and anyone he suspects of to be of Mexican origin feel out of place, wearing a Trump shirt and Trump cap and toting a gun prominently displayed on his hip. The man has gotten on everyone's nerves down at the Santa Fe Plaza, where he showed up repeatedly over recent weeks to intimidate peaceful protesters, musicians, and vendors. And the man allegedly told Garcia, "Mess with me and I'll shoot you." The owner of one of the juice stands down there says he refused service to the guy after he was harassing this owner of, there's illegal aliens around. And this guy, this local business owner says he's just trying to stir up trouble, and I don't do business like that. He's been taunting people, this white guy with a gun, right? He's been taunting people and demanding to see legal documents, making racial slurs, threats of violence. I would hope that Santa Fe could do something about this. This is not a good thing. You can read the story over at sfreporter.com is the website. Anyhow, Anything Goes Friday. David in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Hey, David, what's up? David? Okay, David's listening to his radio instead of his phone. Bill in Vero Beach, Florida. Hey, Bill, what's on your mind?
Hey, Tom, how are you?
I'm well. What's up?
Go Bernie. Hey, I got to ask you a question about the Democrats. Why aren't they more vociferously attacking Trump about everything? I mean, the whole group of Democrats.
I think they're starting
to. I wake up every morning with Trump despair.
Yeah, I think they're starting to, and we're starting to see that. And by the way, apropos of your Bernie comment, I just want to note one more time, we have invited every single Democratic candidate to come on this program whenever they want, relatively speaking, as frequently as they want. And the only one who has taken us up on that offer has been Bernie. So anyhow, I think that, it's entirely, I think the Democrats are moving in the right direction, Bill.
Let me ask you one last question, Tom. Hey, Tom?
Yeah, I'm here.
What I want to ask you is, do you think the Democrats have a plan in case the bubble does burst and there's a recession? Somebody
I'm listening
about the inverse relationship. It's going to happen. It's going to happen. Do they have a plan? Because there's nothing left.
Yeah, they actually do have a plan, and I think restoring America's manufacturing infrastructure is a good step. Democrats have been talking about this forever. Sherrod Brown was one of the leaders on this, calling for tariffs and protectionist trade policies. The problem is you don't do it the way Donald Trump has done it. Donald Trump has done it stupid. If you impose tariffs by executive order, they last until you're not in office anymore, and any other country will go, oh, we'll just outlast President Trump, or for that matter, mess with the election and make sure he doesn't get reelected. So instead, what you do is you pass it through Congress. You achieve a national consensus. This is how policy changes. So that needs to happen. Number one. Number two, we need to strengthen our financial system or our governmental system in large part by repealing the Trump tax cuts, the Bush tax cuts, and the Reagan tax cuts. If we were to go back to the tax system that we had pre-Reagan, when the middle class was incredibly strong, when wealthy people, yes, they were getting wealthy, but middle class and working class people and even poor people were getting wealthy slightly faster than rich people were, although rich people were doing just fine, thank you very much. That would solve probably 60% of our problems. But, that's going to take a solid Democratic majority, and particularly now that we learn that the Koch brothers have been funding the Third Way, this Democratic think tank. It's like, oh my God, we really need progressives in Congress.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
So find a local Democrat who is a good progressive and do everything you can to help them out, or run for office yourself. We'll be back. Our book today is How to Get Rid of a President by David Priess. And this is from the chapter Rejected by the Party, starting on page 12, kind of mid-chapter. Presidents need not be thrown out at the polls on election day to find themselves dislodged from the White House. History shows us that a chief executive's own political allies can remove that incumbent when they perceive him as unpopular or unfit. Refusing to nominate a president for a second term, or better yet, getting the incumbent to realize that he should walk away before it becomes an embarrassing vote at the convention, does bring the party significant pain. But many politicians have calculated that discarding their own party's toxic president by internal action is better than waiting for the voters to do it. This dynamic remained absent for the first half century or so of American politics. George Washington, who didn't represent any formal party, set a precedent by stepping away from re-election after 2 terms. Successor after successor followed suit, keeping the support of their parties until they left office after 8 years. Jefferson, Madison, Monroe, and Jackson lost the next election, both Adamses and Van Buren, or met the Grim Reaper, Harrison. John Tyler, if only in this one respect, was a trendsetter. He began a 6-president cascade of men who failed to appear on their party's ballot in the general election after their first term. One, Zachary Taylor, literally had no choice. Like Harrison, he died in office. The others, by staying alive through their 4-year terms, could have carried their party's banners again on Election Day. Not one did, as national agonizing over slavery and other tensions within each of the major parties made it difficult for any president to build and sustain a governing coalition. Of those 5 chief executives, only James Polk left with a solid reputation and a ledger of successes. He'd told Democrats upon his nomination in 1844, "I shall enter upon the discharge of the high and solemn duties of the office with the settled purpose of not being a candidate for re-election." And he stayed true to his word. It was just as well, only 3 months after what would have been his second inauguration, he died at the age of 53. The 3 presidents who followed Polk, the forgettable series of Millard Fillmore, Franklin Pierce, and James Buchanan, shared 3 characteristics. First, historians routinely rank them among the nation's worst presidents. Second, and related to that, they took no responsibility for resolving the national moral failure of slavery. And third, no matter how they had attained office, they, like future presidents Chester Arthur and Lyndon Johnson, found themselves spurned by their own parties. The Whigs had learned in 1840 that a celebrity candidate seemed to have an easier route into the White House than a party regular. So in 1848, they nominated General Zachary Taylor, a recent hero of battlefields in the Mexican-American War. Despite his lack of solid political principles or any apparent passion for the job, just 2 years earlier he'd said with apparent sincerity, "I am not and never shall be an aspirant for that honor," Taylor won the election over Democratic candidate Lewis Cass. In July 1850, he became the second straight Whig general to president who couldn't make it to the next election alive. Vice President Millard Fillmore took his place. Fillmore had risen to prominence in New York's anti-Mason party dedicated to exposing and opposing Freemason fraternal organizations, but switched allegiance to the Whigs in the 1830s. In the first year and a half of the administration, inter-party rivals had manipulated Taylor better than Fillmore did, leaving him little to do but preside over the Senate and stew over his fate in a useless job. But as president, he was prepared to avenge perceived slights. Ahead of their expected dismissal, all the cabinet members whom Fillard had inherited from Taylor offered their resignations, which were quickly accepted by the new president. He asked them to remain in place for 1 month. They agreed to stay for 1 week. Fillmore would proceed to fire more previous political appointees than any of his successors had. More than half of those at the State Department, for example, had to find new jobs. The biggest development during Fillmore's presidency was the Compromise of 1850. This set of bills admitted California to the Union as a free state, allowed the organization of the Utah and New Mexico territories without reference to slavery, resolved both the Texas state boundary and the Lone Star State's remaining debt, abolished the slave trade in the District of Columbia, and reaffirmed the fugitive slave law that required the returning of slaves escaped across state lines. Fillmore signed each bill, believing this package of measures had fixed what he considered an annoying issue that kept getting in the way of his other priorities. The compromise bills delayed a war between the states, but at a cost. They not only perpetuated slavery, but split the Whigs further apart, as most Northerners refused to abide by the fugitive slave law. Congressional elections in November 1850 increased the Democratic opposition's majorities in both the House and the Senate. The rest of the president's term was so bad that the highlight might have been the start of Commodore Matthew Perry's voyage to Japan to open that country to American trade, even though he didn't arrive until Fillmore left office. Not long after rising to become the chief executive, Fillmore declared he wouldn't run again in the 1852 election. He reiterated that in 1851. But the trappings of presidential power and the pleas of his remaining party faithful convinced him to retract that pledge and make a late entry into the field of candidates. He portrayed his about face as a noble personal sacrifice for the good of the party and the country. And during the spring of that election year, 8 Whig state conventions endorsed him. As delegates gathered for what a leading historian of the era calls the longest, most rancorous, and most debilitating Whig national convention ever to meet, the first tally had Fillmore in the lead. How to get rid of a president.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
This portion of the here with you, and our phones are run now by phone.com, so that's kind of cool. Win in Salon, Maine. Hey, Win, you're on the air. What's up?
Hey, thanks for taking my call, Tom. I've got a question. Earlier this week, you were talking about gun control and possible gun control policy where people should be insured when they own their guns, and et cetera. I want to let you know that I am probably left of you on most matters, at least a little bit. And I do own firearms, but I live in a rural situation. And I think you'd agree that our country is awash with weapons, which is one of the reasons why I am armed, to protect myself, my family, my kids, etc. But it seems like you were proposing a policy where I'm going to have insurance, which would be one of the reasons I think this is kind of a regressive policy you're proposing, because here's a bonanza for the insurance companies.
Yeah, if you can't afford $100 a year for liability insurance, when you shouldn't own a gun.
Well, I don't make that connection between being able to afford insurance and being able to allow it to defend myself.
Let me rephrase that. If you're not willing to spend $100 a year for liability insurance, then you shouldn't have a gun.
I don't know.
Your gun is more likely to kill someone in your own house than anybody else, number one. And number two,
that may statistically be true, but
it is.
It's not.
It absolutely is. And so I would think that you would want to insure yourself against that possibility, since you have increased the probability of somebody dying in your house by 500% by having guns in your home, number one. And number two, I would think that you would want to live in a country where there is some responsibility. The gun owners have some responsibility for their guns. The reason why we did these 3 things for cars, and all my proposal is that we simply treat guns the same way we do cars. And I'm assuming you have a car and you have car liability insurance. The only reason we did that was because cars started killing people. And cars aren't even designed to kill people. Guns are definitely designed to kill people. So if you've got something that's capable of killing people, then you want to make sure that, number one, we know who has these and where they are. Number two, that they have been...
Insure my chainsaw? A chainsaw can kill people.
You are, in all probability, if you have health insurance, your chainsaw is more likely to injure you than to kill you. And I lived in Vermont and New Hampshire for a total of 14, 15 years, and I used a chainsaw for years. And I split wood for 7 years. I heated with wood and split wood every winter. Actually, you split wood in the fall for the winter. Or in the spring. And the simple reality is that chainsaws don't kill anywhere near as many people as cars do. In fact, I have never heard of a person being killed by a chainsaw. I'm sure it happens all the time, but I've never heard of it. But I know people who have been killed in cars.
All my point was, Tom, is that anything could be a weapon.
No, not true.
Could be a weapon.
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, yes, you can kill somebody with your fist. But the simple fact of the matter is that 6,000 pounds of steel going down the highway at 60 miles an hour can be rapidly lethal. And a gun is designed to be lethal. And if we're saying that you have to have insurance to have a car, why not say you have to? Well, I'm asserting that we should be saying that you should have to have insurance to have a gun. I think it's crazy that if the shooter in El Paso that killed those people, those 22 people, if he had killed them with a car, if he had tried to drive them, run them over, the Geico would have been paying their families $1 million each, and would have been looking over his shoulder at the time he applied for insurance but because he had a gun, nobody was checking him out. This is a free market solution. This is something Republicans should love.
Let me make one more point about insurance. I can easily make the point that when somebody's insured, they feel a little more happy-go-lucky about driving their car. Hey, I'm insured. And a lot of people do feel that way, so I'm not so sure insurance.
I don't think there's that many sociopaths, out there driving who would say, hey, I've got car insurance, so if I hit somebody and kill them, say a pedestrian, I'm not even going to get injured in the accident. I'm going to hit a pedestrian and kill them, then my insurance is going to pay for it. I can't imagine anybody thinking that way.
Well, we are talking about sociopaths here because who takes a gun and kills somebody intentionally?
Well, a lot of people do. A lot of people. In fact, the majority of people who are killed with guns are killed because a husband and wife got into a fight and the husband picked up the gun and shot the wife.
Yeah, but you cannot buy an insurance policy or mandate insurance policies and say that's going to take care of our sociopaths.
No, I'm not saying that, but what I am saying is it's going to take care of the death from the gun. Now, when we've exhausted this argument, I'm pulling the plug on it. Robert in Chase City, Virginia. Hey, Robert, what's up?
Yes. What do you think the chances are, with the Russians having an explosion over there, what do you think the chances are that they were working on a neutron bomb?
Well, all the news reporting I've seen suggests that what they're looking at is instead of propelling a rocket with a fuel made out of fossil fuels, basically, or chemicals associated with fossil fuels that runs out, they're trying to propel a rocket with nuclear power, so that rocket, rather than only going 500 or 1,000 miles, could go, over a half hour or an hour period at the most, that rocket could travel for hours and hours, for days, for weeks, fly around in the upper atmosphere, be undetectable or be very difficult to track, and you get a bunch of these things. The problem is that you've got a flying nuclear reactor. Wherever it comes down, it's going to be spraying radiation like crazy all over the place. And in all probability, it's going to be blowing some radiation out the back end as exhaust as well. I mean, I think it's an insane idea. Apparently, the United States tried it back in the late 1950s, early 1960s, and decided it was an insane idea. But it appears that this is what Russia was doing. I don't speak with any authority on this. I don't know. I'm just telling you what I read in the newspaper and see on the news. But that appears to be what they were up to. Neutron bombs, by the way, that's a fully mature technology, and they exist. So, okay.
I was just wondering because.
Okay. Yeah, I don't think they were trying to build a neutron bomb. I mean, they've already got them. Ken in New Oxford, Pennsylvania. Hey, Ken, what's up?
Yes, I would like to bring to your attention the Republican Party has always stood out for fighting criminals and crime. Okay.
Well, they say they have. They've never been in favor of fighting white-collar criminals or white-collar crime.
You got it. No, what I'm going to bring up is that I'm from Illinois, and I know 5 governors spent time in prison. And 10 years ago, finally, the Justice Department said, wait a minute, this massive corruption has got to stop. So what they did, they hit Ron Blagojevich with a RICO statute.
Blagojevich, yeah.
Blagojevich, yeah, I never pronounced his name. But anyway, they hit him with the RICO statutes, and what happened this month, President Trump pardoned him.
He hasn't done that yet. Well, and I don't think it was a pardon. What he's talking about is commuting his sentence, which shortens his sentence. He still is a convicted felon, number one. And number two, Trump, I doubt Trump actually intends to do it or will do it, although who knows. But he wanted to get the conversation going to try to normalize the idea of, hey, it's just a politician selling an office, because Donald Trump has done this kind of thing. I mean, arguably he's done on multiple occasions the kind of crimes that Rod Blagojevich was convicted of, or variations on it, that would fall under that same statute. So I think he was just trying to set the stage for that, or he was just thinking out loud. I mean, a lot of the time what we're seeing, and this, concerns me about Trump's mental health and perhaps about his mental state, whether he's beginning to experience dementia, is, what he thinks suddenly we see on his Twitter feed. So anyhow, Ken, thanks for the call. Jeanette in Spirit Lake, Idaho. Hey, Jeanette, what's up?
Hi, Tom. Thanks. Well, I was hoping to speak with the congressman about one of the biggest problems that progressives have, and that's getting our message out. We need
but he's not
to
here.
reach people. Right. So I'm talking to you. So we need to reach people all across the country, because corporate media isn't really doing it. And, the other day you mentioned Warren's plan, but Bernie also has a great 8-point plan to revitalize, rural America.
Mm-hmm.
And I think a great place to message that, not just for the presidential campaign, but also if they can do it for the Progressive Caucus, are highway billboards. And so I wanted to ask if the caucus can do that. Can they buy billboards to disseminate the message? And I also hope Bernie does that because, big ag is a monopoly that rural America understands,
Yeah.
And so, to me, it's just like how can we get people in a bullet point to understand what progressives are talking about and thinking, and if we can put these billboards that people see every day when they're driving down the highway, up to help do that, I think that is a great idea.
Yeah, I don't know that the Progressive Caucus has ever engaged in advertising. They don't have much of a budget. They don't do fundraising. They don't have access to the billionaires, right? But you're seeing a grassroots movement right now in Kentucky where people just all over the state are putting up these Moscow Mitch billboards and stuff like that. I agree with you, Jeanette, that billboards are very, very powerful advertising vehicles, particularly for politics. It's why Fred Koch was running the Impeach Earl Warren billboards all those years.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Back with more of your calls in just a moment. It's Anything Goes Friday. And welcome back. Gary in Chicago. Hey, Gary, what's up?
Well, this is about climate change prophecy coming true.
Okay.
This is 2 Peter 3. It says, the world will end by fire and the elements will melt in the heat. World is ending by fire. California wildfires, year after year after year. It's the worst one ever. And then the elements melting in the heat is North Pole, South Pole. Oceans are rising. Okay, even though these prophecies are coming true, evangelicals are following this particular verse in the Bible, Psalms 24:1, which says, the earth is God's. And from that, they make a giant leap in wild logic, thinking that God is just going to correct any kind of environmental mistakes we make. Okay, what they should be following is Genesis 1:28, when God gives dominion of the planet over to Adam and Eve, they're to be good stewards of the planet. And then when you put that together with Revelation 11:18, which says, God will destroy those who destroy the planet, it's clear that God wants believers to take an active role in climate change. They should be planting trees in each other's yard. But they're not. They're deniers, and so.
Boy, Gary, you have done a great job of pulling together. In fact, I was thinking about that Revelation 11, and I shall destroy those who destroy the earth when you were talking, and then boom, you popped up with that too. I wish there was some way for you. It's one of the nicest, tightest, concisest summaries of why evangelicals should be worried about climate change and they should be on our side rather than Trump's side that I have heard. And I don't know how to advise you to get it out there, but let me encourage you to do something. I don't know what exactly, but put up a website or create a really nice, tight little meme and start trying to get it going viral on Facebook and Twitter and
Well,
WhatsApp.
what they want is they want to meet the Lord in the air. They want to be raptured. But what they should worry about is their children and their grandchildren. Yep. Even if they don't worry about their lives on earth, they should worry about them being saved. Okay, and that's what they should worry about. But no, they take it to like a selfish thing. They want to meet the Lord.
I'm completely with you, Gary. Get the message out, please. Thank you, Rich in Mission Viejo, California. Hey, Rich, what's up?
Hi, Tom. Basically, it's a civil court case was on a docket in 2016, Jane Doe versus Jeffrey Epstein and Donald Trump, the defendants in a rape case of a 14-year-old girl. They alleged that it was a frivolous case. Judge Ronnie Abrams ruled it was not a frivolous case, and she was set to hear the case in December. Jane Doe pulled out in October because she feared for her life. Gloria Allred was a Gloria Alred's daughter, Lisa Bloom, was her lawyer. Okay, it was on PACER. They had all information about pending cases. Okay, and the other thing was Jeffrey Epstein was held in the SHU. The SHU was on the top floor of the building, above the 9th floor. There's cameras all over the place. The bed is on a concrete slab. Okay, I don't see how he could hang himself at all. Okay, if there was a way of hanging himself, the hyoid bone was broken. I just
which happens in cases of strangulation. Yeah, I'm the idea that you can't get somebody killed in prison is or anybody who asserts that you can't get somebody killed in prison is just wrong. I mean, prison is probably one of the easiest places to hire a hitman, whether it be a fellow prisoner or a guard. So God only knows, Rich. I don't know what's going on, but I hope that the truth comes out. I really do. Rich, thanks a lot for the call. We'll be back. You know, every day here on the Thom Hartmann Program, Louise and I and our team, Sean, Nate, Shira, Dave, Chase, Sue, Nigel, Ron, we all work to put together the very, very best show we possibly can. And there's an enormous amount of work that goes into the show. And one of the things that comes out of that is a lot of content, a lot of specific information that we go through and we dig out and, we want to share with you. And Sue puts that into our newsletter every week. And I think you will, if you don't already receive our newsletter, it comes in email every day, about an hour after we're off the air, or maybe a couple hours after we're off the air. And Sue goes through and pulls literally every link to every story that we talked about and puts it into the newsletter. It's free. We don't sell a list or anything. You complete safety and security. There's no charge. There's no nothing. Just, plug in your email address over at thomhartmann.com. And you get signed up for the newsletter. It's all fairly obvious. You'll see it on the website. So check it out, thomhartmann.com. Thank you.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Thank you. Welcome back. Friday here. Colt in Danville, Illinois. Hey, Colt, what's up?
Hi, Tom. I'm a huge fan, and I just want to say thanks for your show.
Thank you.
Listened to it forever. So, hey, I'm just, as a progressive, kind of troubled with the whole corporations aren't people thing. Doing some reading on it, and I'll just pose it to you like this, I guess. If there was an amendment to say that corporations are not people, or wouldn't that affect the right to bring a lawsuit, such as Planned Parenthood did in Roe versus Wade?
No, it would not.
Would it affect?
Would it
not affect?
No, there's no way that you could eliminate corporate personhood in the legal sense. With regard to things like the right to sue, the mandate to pay taxes, those things require standing, and that standing is achieved through a certain type of personhood. Classically, prior to 1886, or arguably prior to 1817, but classically, we had these two categories of persons. You had natural persons and artificial persons, and it was understood that artificial persons, corporations, churches, and governments, could be actors in a court and could, pay taxes or be held liable for taxes and fines and fees and could even be prosecuted. But they did not have access to human rights claims. They did not have access to the First Amendment protection of free speech. They did not have access to the Fourth Amendment protection of privacy. They did not have access to the Fifth Amendment protection against self-incrimination. So, yeah.
If I may, did the NAACP versus Alabama did extend the rights of personhood to more of those individual rights that you said were previously for just natural people? And
well, that's my point. Is that it's not just that case, and I'm not familiar with that case, so I can't speak specifically to it. But what has happened is, in a whole series of cases now over the years, the Supreme Court has granted these human rights to corporations. And in fact, all of those categories that I just described. The Buckley case was the First Amendment right. The Fourth Amendment privacy right, I don't remember the case or the year. The same thing with the Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination. But, a constitutional amendment that strips corporations of, quote, personhood doesn't actually strip them of legal, technical personhood. What it does is it strips them of access to human rights, and that's, in my opinion, a good thing. Rich in Denver, Colorado. Hey, Rich, what's up?
Hey, Tom. Good. Happy Friday to you.
Thanks. Back at you.
The last caller, I'm a big fan. Hey, a couple things when I was listening to you with Representative Khanna. You when you were in Chicago, you were talking about out here in Denver. I have seen commercials, Tom, where the service unions and the trade unions and the IB, International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, and others are advertising on TV and radio to recruit workers. Because I remember that was one of the topics that when you were in the forum in Chicago. Yeah. And as to Ro Khanna and Bernie, love Bernie as well. We've got 12 years. I think you posed the question before. You've said it many times. I wish you would have said it to Ro Khanna. The first party that starts bringing jobs back to America and union and manufacturing, and at one time, this time, union and manufacturing employed 1/3 of all Americans. Yep. We'll start winning the wars, and also
start winning elections.
Winning the elections, right, as well. And Reagan, we had comprehensive immigration policy. Like as he said, you said Reagan just kind of winked and nodded and gave his corporate buddies cheap.
Well, it was actually a deal,
that's where it
Rich.
all started.
No, it was actually a deal, and you go back and you look at the history of that time, and it's absolutely fascinating. In the '86 case, the Republicans wanted to, actually, both the Republicans and Democrats wanted to do something about, people who were here without documentation, who had been here for a long period of time. I think you had to be here at least 5 years. You had to prove you'd been here at least 5 years and a good citizen, basically, in order to qualify. But the Democrats wanted to add it to the law, because prior to '86, it wasn't illegal for an employer to hire somebody who was here without documentation. So the Democrats wanted that added to the law. And they got that in the law in 1986. The Republicans said, okay, we'll go along with that if you'll let us legalize these people who, will expand the labor pool and drive down wages. And the Democrats were like, okay, in exchange for that, put in here strong provisions that employers who hire people who are not here without documentation can go to jail. And that's what passed. That was the Immigration Reform Act of 1986. And then Reagan proceeded to ignore the provision about employers. And every president since him has ignored that provision. Right. And that's the simple reality.
Okay. And it's I guess and that's exactly like what you say very often. We don't have an illegal employee problem. We have an illegal employer problem.
Right. We don't have an illegal immigration problem in this country. We have an illegal employer problem. Yeah. And
hey, have a great weekend, Tom.
Yeah. Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot, Rich. I appreciate the call. This is, I think the Democrats are just starting to realize how they got played by Reagan, and that was damn near 40 years ago. But they got played, and anyway, We'll be back on Monday. I hope you have a wonderful weekend. And if you're in Portland, I hope you can find a nice place to have a beer and a pizza or something like that, rather than feeding the wackadoodles. But we'll see how it all shakes out. So have a great weekend and a great Friday afternoon. And in the meantime, don't forget, democracy doesn't just fall out of the sky. It's not some random thing, and it's not, by the way, a natural law. It requires you. So get out there, get active, tag, you're it. Have a great weekend. We'll see you on Monday.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.